couple.
Mhm. For members of the public listening, we are not taking questions at this time.
Can I ask that everyone just mute your phones just for etiquette purposes, because we are getting background noises and everything. It's going to be a bit of a challenge as we try to conduct this today. Thank you.
Well, Deborah, are you going to mute everybody and just unmute us when we need to speak?
You know, for those of us who are panelists, I don't generally do that unless it becomes problematic.
Okay.
I find that, you know, if those of us on the panelists have background noise, we can mute ourselves, and if we need to speak,
All
we
right.
can. I
Just
kind of
wanna make
use,
sure.
in previous meetings, I've used the honor system and it's worked fairly well.
All right. We're all
So
honored
unless we see a meeting, I mean, an issue, then.
For what it's worth, we just went live on YouTube.
Okay, good.
For what it's worth, we just went live on YouTube.
Okay, good. I'm not seeing Mayor Ray yet.
There she is. Do we have all the board? Alan, Victor. Okay. Very good. Just get another minute then. Just get another minute. Okay. Dave, should we start? Or do you want to give it another minute?
That's up to you, Chairman.
Yeah.
Just one question in terms of just procedure. Are you, Deborah, or someone from the township going to be controlling the exhibits, or are you looking for the applicant to share the screen for the exhibits?
Chairman, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer?
I think as long as you refer to the same documents, meaning what's on the website, if you know where you're looking for the stuff, I'm going to presume as long as you can get to there efficiently, I'm sure it's no different for you than if we were to do it. I think it's easier for you to do it because you're going to go to the documentation. So I'd say, yeah, you can do it yourself, but just make sure people know exactly what one you're looking at, and we'd like to walk you through with that and what page you're going to go to. So
Okay, yeah, I'll just tee it up on my screen.
Yeah.
Ready. Okay, thank you.
as long as we can get it on the website, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I'll just tee it up.
Hey, Deb,
Yes?
I hear a whole hell of a lot of noise on my end.
Yeah, there's a lot of background noise, so.
Like 10 people talking at once.
Because not everybody's muting their phones. They got to mute.
Yeah, just access through one medium, YouTube, Zoom, or phone, one of the three, not all of them.
Mayor, Chairman, can we wait just one more second? Because Mayor Ray just sent me an email. He would like me to resend the link.
Okay, that's fine.
Mayor, can we just hold on a minute? Send me an email. Resend the link.
Am I not hearing you?
We're just waiting.
Mayor Ray should be joining us momentarily.
And at that point, I think, Deb, we have all the board members present.
Correct.
We're just waiting.
Mayor Ray should be joining us momentarily.
Oh, that's a big delay.
Yeah, somebody has a big delay.
That's a big delay.
Yeah, somebody has a big delay.
Me.
Uh-oh. Where's Brendan? Well, let's just carry on. I assume that Brendan will get in a minute or two, right, before we do roll call.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I
All right.
have a delay, a huge one.
Don't forget to unpause the video.
I just started the video. We are live.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending the planning board meeting of June 9th, 2020, 7:36 p.m. Just go through the initial points on the agenda. Call to order. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting a copy of the public meeting to the Millington board, and website, and a copy to Echo Sentinel. Standing procedures say the board is a quasi-judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and to call appropriate to a judicial meeting must be made at all times. Cut off meeting 10:30 unless we extend the meeting. So with that, those are the initial procedural points. Deb, do you have the flag? Maybe we can stand for Pledge of Allegiance.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hold on. Wait, just let me do a share screen.
10:30. So with that, those are the procedural points. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag.
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it
The
stands.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody.
Of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah. Victor, do you have a little mouse running around in a wheel with the power in your house or your internet? You're a big day, man. Okay, Deb, do you want to do the roll call, please?
Yes. Mayor Ray.
Present. Sorry for the grand entrance.
Committeeman Verleza.
Here.
Mr. Falvey.
Here.
Mr. Malinowski.
Here.
Mr. Malinowski.
Here.
Mr. File.
Here.
Mr. Richardson has recused himself from tonight's hearing. Mr. Sandown.
No.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Present.
Chairman Hands.
Yeah.
And allow me to note that we have our attorney present, Yolanta Maziars. We have our planner present, Elizabeth Laney, and we have representing Casey and Keller for our engineer tonight, Mike Lanzafama.
Thank you.
We have a quorum.
Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody, to the planning board meeting. Unfortunately, the circumstances of the last few months have meant it's a difficult time for us all, I'm sure. But please feel rest assured that we're going to proceed with this application, hopefully in the most efficient and prudent manner that we possibly can under these circumstances. We feel it's appropriate to continue the application at this point in time for the fair process for all parties, applicant and members of the public. So we hope that the procedures and the process that they will go through in a minute will at least set a good foundation for discussions that are going to happen over the next 1, 2, or 3 weeks as necessary. So again, appreciate everybody's dedication and interest to the process. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different to what we would normally do in a in-person meeting, but under the circumstances, we feel that this is the best approach that we can accommodate at this time. Know that obviously a lot of information is going to be published on the website, so please follow along there as well. And then we have old business and some new business and adjournment later. So with that said, again, appreciate everybody's time. Some people may be new to the process. Obviously, this is not, we're trying to follow our common course of procedures. So with that, I'll hand over to Deb. Perhaps you can just outline how we would plan to handle the application of Prism at Millington LLC tonight and for next.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. I want to first make note to the public that we, together with our attorney and the township representatives, we have had multiple conversations about moving forward in a virtual setting, and we have made sure to do everything that we can, to follow the municipal land use law, to provide everything to the public, and as most know, that we have everything on the website, which I'll note in a few minutes. Tonight's proceedings, we will not, first and foremost, we will not be taking questions with regard to procedures that we are following for the virtual hearing. On our website, on either the planning board or the zoning board pages for the agendas, you can find notes about virtual procedures and how we will be handling them. When the applicant begins testimony this evening, the procedures that we will follow will be that the applicant will begin with their first professional for testimony. After that testimony is completed, then at such time, the board members and our board professionals will be asking questions. At such time that our board professionals and our board members have completed all their questions, then we will open up the questions to the public. That being said, that might be tonight, it might not. The board will consider the time frame at which questions will begin. Now, if the time gets too late during testimony this evening, that we will not be able to have questions from the public, rest assured, you will be heard, and we will make sure that all members of the public will have their adequate time to ask questions. Assuming we carry the meeting, because as everyone knows, this is a very large application, there will be multiple hearings. At the next hearing, then prior to any further testimony, the public will have a chance to ask questions of the testimony which we just heard. So that's basically the process. Attorney Maziarz, would you like to add anything to that?
Not at this time. I will just say that the state guidelines require us, or not require us, but prohibit us from meeting in person at this time. And especially when this meeting was being planned, we knew that the executive orders would not permit us to meet in person. So we endeavored, Deborah and township officials and I, to come together and to create this virtual platform. And it has been a work in progress. But we are in compliance with the municipal land use law. The DCA has issued guidelines, and part of their guidelines are that we should continue the meetings. We have to continue the meetings in accordance with the municipal land use law timeframes. And we have not had any relief yet from the legislature for those timeframes. And I don't anticipate that we will at this point, since the governor is now endeavoring to open the state for larger gatherings. So because we found ourselves in this situation, in order to comply with the law, we are doing this virtual hearing. If something should happen and we have to discontinue the hearing, which I do not anticipate with this platform, then Mr. Regan, the attorney for the applicant, and I we'll have to think of something different to do. But for the time being, we are in compliance with both DCA guidelines and with the municipal land use law, and we will proceed with a virtual hearing.
Yes, thank you, Attorney Maziarz. Additionally, as most of, I'm hoping all attendees and all panelists and everyone is aware, we have provided all documentation that the applicant has given to us at this time on the website, which with Chairman's permission, I will go there now.
Yes, please.
Share screen. Okay. So as everyone can see, who can share? Okay. Hold on a minute. Okay, so here, as everyone is aware, this is our website. Under the government tab for planning board, under your agendas and minutes, there is a tab at the top, which I noted at the very beginning, that is virtual board hearing information. This gives you a general guideline of the virtual format that we follow. If you scroll down to June 9th of today with our agenda where the call information is located, the Prism application with all supporting documents are there. Additionally, I will note that when I upload any documents that are received, I try to note the date that is uploaded so the public and our board members are well aware of when these documents were loaded. For instance, this morning I uploaded 3 additional exhibits that will be discussed at some point during the hearing. It may or may not be tonight. Additionally, actually our webmaster hasn't uploaded. There is a township fire report that was completed a couple months ago that will be going up here as well. So this is where our professionals, this is where our board members, and this is where the applicant will be referring directly to this evening for documents for testimony. So I believe that is everything that we have to share. Again, we're not going to be taking questions from the public with regards to procedures. Your public members are more than welcome to email me tomorrow if they have concerns about the procedures, and I can direct those to our board attorney. Other than that, as soon as each professional testifies and the board members and our board professionals have asked their questions, then we will open it up to the public. So, Mr. Chairman, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Deb. So to begin the application, I'll ask the representative from Prism come forward and provide the summary and opening statements. Bob, who's going to start first?
Frank?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Good evening. Frank Regan, attorney for the applicant and property owner Prism Millington LLC. We're here this evening with regards to a preliminary and final site plan application for the property at 50 Division Avenue. The applicant has provided notice to property owners within 200 feet of the property and advertised in the Echo Sentinel, all done 10 days prior to this scheduled hearing, including information regarding the hearing being held virtually. I also provided an affidavit of service to the board secretary and attorney with regards to the notices. Just a little background with regards to the property. It's located in the mixed-use overlay zone. The property is approximately just under 12 acres in size, and it's currently occupied by a number of industrial and commercial buildings and paved parking and loading areas, all of which are proposed to be demolished as part of the project and application. The applicant proposes to develop approximately 2/3 of the property, with the balance remaining undeveloped due to the environmental restrictions as a result of its prior industrial use. The applicant proposes the construction of 140 rental residential units in 14 10-unit buildings with parking garages and surface parking. approximately 4,000 square foot retail building, and a total of 307 parking spaces, along with various site amenities, an 1,800 square foot community building and pool, and other site improvements. The majority of the units will be 2 bedrooms. That's 126 of 140, with the balance being 3 bedrooms. The buildings will be 3 stories in height, with ground floor parking garages. The proposed development is designed to meet the requirements of the MU-0 zoning for the property. Pursuant to the township's affordable housing settlement with Fair Share Housing Center back in September 2017, the township agreed to rezone this property to create an affordable housing overlay zone to permit multifamily development of the property with the inclusion of affordable housing, which it did through the adoption of an ordinance in May of 2018 to create the mixed-use overlay zone. As I indicated, the project's going to be residential, therefore 15% of the 140 units, or 21 of the 140 units, will be affordable housing. They will be spread throughout all of the buildings on the site, and the units will comply with all applicable state laws and regulations with regards to affordable housing. The applicant met with the technical review committee of the planning board, including its professionals, and has responded to the review memos from the board engineer and board planner. And our professionals will be addressing a number of items in these memos in their testimony. At this time, I expect to have 5 witnesses that will be testifying. I also have representatives of the applicant and property owner who will be available to answer questions in the event that myself or our professionals are unable to answer those questions, but I don't anticipate them providing any testimony, again, unless it's absolutely necessary. So our first witness is Edward Sullivan, who's the licensed site remediation professional for the property. So I'd like to bring him to the front and have him get sworn and qualify him so that he can proceed with his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give with regard to this application will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Can you please state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
Edward Sullivan, Sullivan.
Thank you.
Mr. Sullivan, could you provide the board with your professional educational background?
Yes. I am a licensed site professional, remediation professional in New Jersey. I have 30 years of experience in environmental remediation projects. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree from Rutgers University in geology, and I have completed graduate studies in hydrogeology and in environmental engineering at Wright State University and at Drexel University.
Have you previously provided testimony before boards or in courts?
I have in the courts. I have not in front of a board.
I offer Mr. Sullivan as an environmental expert for purposes of discussing the environmental condition of the property.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Sullivan, you're obviously familiar with the property, and I know you have a role as the licensed site remediation professional. So if you could, proceed to describe for the board your role with regards to the environmental condition of the property, and I'll turn it over to you to provide your testimony and ask any questions on anything that I think we might want you to elaborate on.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. As Frank mentioned, I am the licensed site remediation professional for the site. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that title or that role, maybe I'll spend a couple of minutes describing what that
I'm
is.
sorry, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, can you just say what file you've just now presented? Some people may be just calling it up from the website directly.
What file?
For the record,
What file?
this is identified as an aerial map prepared by Stonefield Engineering with a date of June 11th, 2019.
Okay.
We might have to reorganize some of the exhibit numbers because I believe I on the website, I called this one Exhibit 3.
Exhibit 4. It's Exhibit 4 aerial map.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Yolanta, should we renumber or do you want to keep it? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I think we should keep it the way it is. So let's just refer it as Exhibit 4. Although I have to ask Mr. Regan, you are going to present all of the exhibits that are currently on the website and are currently marked as A1, A2, A3, because I don't want to be left with gaps.
Oh, that's our intention.
Okay. Okay, very good. If the board would like, we can leave it this way because it'll just be easier for people to follow along because people have probably already reviewed them in this order. So maybe we should keep it and mark it as A4 officially.
Sorry, this one's A3. My mistake.
I'm sorry, A3. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
That'd be fine. Thank you. I think it'd be the easiest way of doing it.
Okay.
Okay, so I continue.
So let's mark this officially as A3, and A3, Deborah, is called the EIS aerial uploaded June 9th, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the role of the LSRP. So the LSRP program was implemented in New Jersey starting in 2009. And it came into effect through the passage of the Site Remediation Reform Act. And the reason that the LSRP position was created was because there was a large backlog of remediation cases under NJDEP oversight. So it was designed to try to speed up the remediation and to cut back on the backlog of cases under the NJDEP. So what the law does is it allowed certain qualified environmental professionals to apply for this license and then to take an exam. Passage of the exam earns you the LSRP license. So LSRPs must follow a strict code of conduct, and the highest obligation of the LSRP is protection of human health and the environment. So that code of conduct was put in place to ensure that LSRPs wouldn't be beholden to private entities that they might be working for as clients. That it was clear that their highest priority was protection of human health and the environment. So as the LSRP, my role for this particular site is oversight of the investigation and the remediation of soil and groundwater contamination issues. At the completion of a site remediation, the LSRP issues a site closure document. It's called the Response Action Outcome, or RAO. So it's a letter that the LSRP issues that certifies that, in my professional opinion, that the remediation has been completed in compliance with all of the applicable regulations and guidance issued by the NJDEP and is protective of public health, safety, and the environment. So that's essentially my role as the LSRP. The next thing I will talk about is just some of the general site conditions. So Frank had mentioned, and you can see the site plan on the screen. So environmental issues at this site thus far have primarily been documented through the environmental impact statement, which was recently revised in April of 2020. It was completed by Stonefield Engineering, and also by the completion of a preliminary assessment and site investigation that was completed by EWMA in 2019. So that is the basis for all of our knowledge about the environmental conditions at this point. The site is basically divided into two areas. The first area is a 4.5 acre area that's referred to as the restricted area. This is an area where there was a former asbestos landfill that was remediated under the NPL program, which is also known as the Superfund program. This site was capped with clean soil and vegetation. It's fenced, and it has been delisted from the Superfund list. So the remediation of that site is essentially complete. And it's my understanding that the developer is responsible for implementing an operations and maintenance plan under the oversight of the EPA and the NJDEP to ensure that the engineering controls, the cap, and the fencing remains protective. Because that issue has essentially been remediated, I'm not going to speak any more to that issue tonight. I'm going to concentrate more on the remainder of the property, which would be more under my purview as the LSRP. So the remainder of the site is made up of approximately 7.5 acres. And this is the area that's going to be developed. I'll refer to it as the apartment area to distinguish it from the restricted area. So the restricted, the apartment area historically had a number of different entities that operated there. Most predominantly, there was an asbestos products manufacturing facility there. There also has been a number of other sort of light industrial uses of the property, including the current uses of this area. Obviously, the asbestos manufacturing operations are what resulted in the asbestos landfill that has been closed. So in general, the site is underlain, and when I say the site, I'm now referring to the apartment area, is underlain by fill material to a depth of about 5 feet roughly across the area, probably placed there at the time it was originally developed to raise it above what may have been the flood area at that point. Typically, this type of fill was referred to in New Jersey as historic fill, which means that it's just fill that was placed to raise the grade of a tract of land in order that it be usable. Below this historic fill material is native soils, and they consist mostly of finer grained soils, clays, and silts that extend down to the bedrock surface. And the bedrock surface, it appears, may vary somewhat below the site, but in general, it looks like the depth of the bedrock is about somewhere between 20 to 35 feet, depending on where you are at the site. The bedrock formation at the site is a formation called the Tawako Formation, and that is a shale rock formation. And there is groundwater flow and aquifers within this bedrock formation. As far as groundwater is concerned, generally there hasn't been a lot of groundwater observed above the bedrock, either in these native sediments or in the fill material. There has been some localized, what's called perched water observed. I think most commonly at the north end of the site. And for those of you not familiar with what perched water is, it's essentially thin layers of water that form on top of certain layers of soil. Typically, it's not permanent, it's transient, and it's not continuous throughout the entire site. The true water table at this site, I believe, is in the bedrock, probably at least 20 feet deep. But some of these perched layers of water are seen in the 8 to 9 foot depth range. But again, they aren't continuous across the site. So I think that's about all of the sort of general conditions at the site that I wanted to talk about. And I guess next I'll get into the actual environmental investigations that have been completed so far at the site. So as I mentioned before, EWMA completed a preliminary assessment and a site investigation at the site. And basically your preliminary assessment identifies what are called areas of concern. So different areas or prior operations at the site that could potentially be a source of environmental contamination. And then the site investigation is designed to investigate those areas of concern to determine whether or not there is in fact any contamination of the soil or the groundwater. So what we see at the site thus far, and there's a lot of, I'll try not to go into a lot of detail and a lot of the terminology used in New Jersey. I will touch on a couple of things briefly though. There are a few types of soil remediation standards that are promulgated by the state of New Jersey, by the NJDEP. One type of soil standard is designed to be protective of groundwater. So it wouldn't allow certain levels of contamination above a certain standard that may potentially have adverse effects on the groundwater beneath the site. The other type of soil standard is what's called the direct contact standard. And those types of standards, as you might pick up from the name, is that they're designed to protect people from direct contact with soils that might be contaminated. And there's a couple of different ways that people can be impacted by soil. One is through dermal contact, touching it with your hands or on your skin. And the other way is through inhalation, which would be for, something may volatilize or vaporize out of a soil and could potentially be inhaled. So that's the background behind the soil remediation standards in New Jersey. So what we're seeing at the site thus far are relatively low levels of contamination. There are some metals that have been detected in soil. Some of them may be natural background metals and may not be associated with any operations at the site. That's something that's going to have to be further investigated. And there are also few compounds in a class of compounds that are called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. That's basically a type of compound that's found in petroleum products, asphalt, things of that nature. They're very common throughout New Jersey. Probably can't take a soil sample anywhere in New Jersey without finding one of those compounds. But the levels are relatively low. There actually were not any samples, other than one, I believe, one sample that actually exceeded the direct contact standards. So what we've seen so far doesn't indicate that there'd be any risk of contact to these soils associated with any construction operations at the site, workers or not residents, because residents who eventually be living here. So there shouldn't be any risk associated with direct contact associated with these soils. The impact to groundwater issues may need to be further evaluated. There were some metals that exceeded those standards, but there are varying ways that those pathways can be further evaluated during the next stage of the investigation that will be done. The other issue identified in soils at the site was there was some limited evidence of some limited amounts of asbestos in some of the soils outside the landfill area, I believe north and a little bit west of the existing buildings. So that's an issue that will need to be addressed during construction. There'll have to be some precautions taken during construction, things like dust control, where you can wet down the soils to control dust, probably a worker and even a perimeter air monitoring program. And these would all be done as part of the process through, there could be a community air monitoring plan that could be written and implemented, and also a site health and safety plan. So either or both of these documents would address the precautions to be taken during construction associated with any of this asbestos containing material.
Ed, do you mind just, thank you so far. Can I just stop you for a second if you don't mind? I just want to make sure we can follow along clearly, because so far you presented that one exhibit. I know you referred to the EMWA report, which was added to the updated EIS statement that was published on the website. Can I make sure that we can follow a little bit along as well, where you're taking this information from, where you're referring it to, just so we have some clarity around where the information is. You mentioned soils, groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. Is that fair to ask you to just point us a bit more clearly as to where that information resides?
Yes, it would all soil and groundwater issues that I'm talking about would be in the EWMA site investigation report. So there's both a written narrative and I believe some maps on there that will show different sample locations and what contaminants were detected, what the concentrations were, whether they exceeded any NJDEP soil standards. So yeah, all of that would be presented both in the text and on figures and tables in that site investigation report.
And that's the updated one that's uploaded on 6/3 or whatever it was?
I don't know when it was uploaded. I know there's also the environmental impact statement that was uploaded recently. All of this detailed information about the sampling, I don't believe is presented in the EIS. I think there's just a general summary in there. So if anyone's looking for details, it would have to be in that EWMA site investigation report.
Which has been attached to the updated version. So just so we're clear, let me make sure I'm clear here. We're looking at page number, let me just put it up a second. Excuse me a second. I'll find it. It's the one that's in the most recent.
There's a preliminary assessment site investigation report that's an exhibit to the environmental impact statement. It's the last document attached to the environmental impact statement. It's dated March 2019.
Right. I'm looking at, and it starts on page about 88 or so of the most recent uploaded document. Is that correct? Just headed Appendix E, March 2019, preliminary assessment site investigation by EWMA. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure everybody else who wants to follow along a little bit can refer to that same document.
Yes, and I would, if anyone is interested in some of these soil sampling results that I'm talking about, if you all have the same version I do, there's a figure 4 in that document that shows where various samples were collected at the site and what metals and were detected and what the concentrations were.
Okay. Yeah, if you just refer to, if you've got specific points you want to refer to, just refer to where they are in that document. That'd be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay. And as you can see, if you look at that document, there's a lot of samples, a lot of results. I'm trying to give a general overview.
Of course.
Acceptable. I didn't want to get bogged down in, this was detected at this concentration.
No. I just want to make, we can refer back to where you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah, so this figure 4 would be a good place to look for those who are interested.
Okay.
What page is figure 4 on?
I don't have the exact upload in front of me. I just have on my computer the report.
If you've got the page number of the actual report, that may be helpful.
I'm trying to find that page now.
Yeah, if you just a test to make sure we're in the same, talking about the same thing. Can you just give me the page number of the EWMA report that you're referring to?
Yeah, in the version that I have, it lists figure numbers, but it doesn't have page numbers. I think only text page numbers.
It makes it very difficult to follow along.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I should have been on the website.
Can you go to the website and look at that page to help us follow along?
I could, unless it's something Frank can readily pull up.
It looks like it's around page 134. I see a lot of references to figure 4.
Yeah, the copy of the EIS that I have only has a 60-page document attached to it. It doesn't have, I think, the exhibits. I will try to take a look at the website.
Yeah, the document I'm looking at is 149 pages. Mr. Chairman, is that the same document that you're looking at, 149 pages?
Exactly, and it's about page 86 or so. It starts the WMA report, which will be the bulk of the rest, the 60 pages after that.
And it would probably be at the end of that document. That's typically where the figures are placed after the text of the report.
Yeah, I don't think it's not structured like that. However, please continue, just bear in mind, we're looking at that report. The report that we have access to is the one on the website. So you're referring back to the one on the same document if you're referring to a particular report.
Okay, shall I continue?
Please do, yes.
Okay. Okay, so I talked about some of the soil results and the asbestos material. I think the other thing of note at the site to me was there's an area north of Building 1 on the property, where as part of the prior operations, they had two features in the below the ground surface that they refer to as oil pits, and it looked like they may have disposed of used lubricating oils, hydraulic oils, possibly at one point. So there is some contamination of soil in that area, and then there's a limited amount of what's called free product in that area, which free product essentially is these oils, if they are placed into pits like they were here, they'll essentially sit on top of water that's present below the ground surface, because oil is lighter than water. So it basically floats on top of the water. And in this area, this is an area north of Building 1 where there was some perched water. So at that depth of around 8 or 9 feet, there's a small amount of oil that's present on top of the water table. And these conditions are all conditions that are very common in New Jersey. I deal with them all the time on other sites that I work at. So they aren't very complicated issues. There's a number of different approaches to remediate these types of conditions. Most typically, it would involve excavation of the impacted material and disposal of it off-site. Usually that's the most direct way to deal with it, although there are other ways that you can deal with it. So those are essentially the soil sort of conditions that exist at the site. As far as the groundwater is concerned, so there's basically two media that you're concerned with environmental issues. One is the soil, one is the groundwater. So as far as the groundwater is concerned, there is some contamination of the groundwater as well. Both the perched layer, for example, the oil product that I just mentioned in one area, and then there is some contamination of the groundwater in the bedrock aquifer. And that's a class of contaminants that are called volatile organic compounds. And again, that's another issue that's very, very common in New Jersey. Groundwater contamination at relatively low levels. You see it all across northern New Jersey. So it is another issue that we have a lot of experience in dealing with, and it shouldn't be overly complicated. But as far as the groundwater is concerned, another issue that may arise is that because these compounds are volatile, they volatilize off of the groundwater. And there's a potential for these vapors to migrate upward into site buildings. So there may be a need for during construction to install vapor barriers or other other vapor mitigation systems. We don't know that for sure, but that's a possibility. So the only other environmental related issue that should be mentioned, I think, are that inside the existing buildings, samples were collected of the concrete from the existing floors and walls within the buildings. Those samples showed some contamination also. Some metals, I think, were primarily what was detected. And so that's an issue that during demolition of the buildings, that material will need to be properly handled and disposed off-site, and it's unlikely that that material would be able to be reused on site. But that, again, that's an issue that we would look more closely at during the next stage of investigation. So I keep referring to the next stage of investigation. So what the next stage is going to be is what's called a remedial investigation. So during the site investigation, we found some contamination. And what happens during the remedial investigation is that you further characterize that contamination to essentially define where the limits of it, how far does it extend, how deep does it extend. So that's the purpose of the remedial investigation. And EWMA is scheduled, I believe, to complete the remedial investigation later this year, I think in the fall into the winter of this year. So that'd be the next stage. I guess I would conclude by saying what I said before, that overall the issues that have been identified here at this point appear to be relatively minor and are common issues found at many sites throughout New Jersey. So I think that remediation should be relatively straightforward. And with the asbestos material in the soil, that can be readily handled also. It's just going to take some precautions and some monitoring to take place during construction to make sure that we protect public health and worker health and safety. And I think that's all I had.
Mr. Chairman, question?
Yeah, do you mind? I'm sorry, I was going to ask a couple of questions. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, go ahead, David. That's fine.
You sure?
Sure.
A couple of things that just struck me. You talked about the community, some plans for community air, I think you called it. Can you talk through some of the plans during remediation and demolition, and which ones may be instigated for this property?
I think those the plans that I mentioned, the community air monitoring plan and the health and safety plan would be written prior to demolition. It would be implemented during implementation of demolition, site grading. I think site remediation, if we're doing any excavation or any other remediation efforts. So it would go across the board, across all of those efforts.
Are those standard practices?
They are, yes.
Thank you. Just on the EWMA report, there's some other areas of interest or areas of concern at the end of the report. Did you address all of those, or is that they're not a concern anymore?
Okay, let me look at the end of the report.
All right, page 9, conclusions, section 9, page 60.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like there are some other areas where samples were collected and where similar contamination was detected. Looks to be at minor levels, sometimes below remediation standards. The areas that I touched on, I think are going to be the major concerns. These oil pits, And the area where a lot of the soil contamination was detected was west of Building 2. So I think those are the areas I think that will be the primary concerns. But any other areas, if there's even one sample that exceeds a soil standard somewhere else, additional sampling will be completed there, because that's part of the remedial investigation process, is to delineate any contamination that you find that exceeds a soil standard.
And this is Frank. All of the areas of concern, there were multiple areas of concern identified in the PASI. As you just indicated, I think all of those will be investigated. But just because they're identified in the PASI doesn't necessarily mean that there's contamination in that area of concern. Is that correct?
Correct. It's an iterative process. So the preliminary assessment identifies areas of concern. Then you sort of weed out certain areas that don't appear. So the areas of concern are sort of generic areas that have been identified through DEP guidance and prior NJDEP forms and guidance. So you sort of winnow that list down to areas that would actually require sampling, and that's your site investigation. Then once you do your site investigation, you further winnow the list down based on where you actually found any contamination. And then the final step is the remedial action, where after you complete your remedial investigation, if you determine that remediation is necessary, then you implement that remedial action.
Okay, and I know a number of the areas of concern referred to, underground storage tanks and so on. I mean, all of those would be removed as part of the remediation, as well as the demolition and clearance of the property in anticipation of development.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And the plans that you mentioned, including the remedial investigation by the end of this year, are those plans going to be available to the township, to public, or is that a DEP perhaps, or is that something that's within the purview of the developer?
Well, the remedial investigation is done following the NJDEP process. Varies from site to site as to whether you actually develop a work plan. A lot of times, to streamline the process, and the DEP allows this, you just simply continue on with your investigation without completing a formal, let's call it a remedial investigation work plan. But I'm sure that's something that we can work through and share some information about what's being planned for the remedial investigation sampling.
Yeah, the reason for asking these questions about the plans and stuff, it sounds like obviously there's a lot more work to be done through the process, right? So perhaps the more you can educate, at least myself, if not everybody else, on those steps, just to provide, if not a level of comfort, but a level of understanding as to how the process will unfold, potentially unfold, over the coming weeks and months, and who's going to monitor that, where's the safety nets, if you will, just to ensure that there's some certainty over the process. So,
okay,
if you don't mind me just pushing down those avenues of conversation.
Sure, and there will be some document developed that will outline what sampling will occur during this remedial investigation, and of course the plans that I mentioned before will be available as well, health and safety plan or air monitoring plan.
Thank you.
Ed, can I ask, what in terms of the remediation, because I think that's where the chairman is going, how do you anticipate the remediation occurring? Will it occur prior to demolition? after demolition, because obviously the site is going to be cleared in order for it to be developed, assuming, the application's approved. But in terms of the process, or is it too early to be able to determine that?
It's probably too early, but I think the best approach is to implement remedial action in coordination with the site development plans, including the demolition. I'll just give an example, and I don't know if this applies to this site in particular, but let's say some soil contamination in an area that extends underneath an existing building. Well, in that kind of case, you want to wait until the building is demolished or is no longer there to excavate out that contamination. That's just one example of how you try to coordinate remedial actions with the site development.
And that's as you have indicated. I mean, that's typical in New Jersey. I think you've indicated as part of your testimony that, at least based on the investigation that's been done to date, nothing has been identified that's wasn't maybe unexpected, and thus, in terms of how you're going to deal with it, you would deal with it as you indicated, as the site's being developed. It would be coordinated. The remediation would be coordinated with the demolition, the clearance, and the development of the site.
Yes, exactly. And yes, the contaminants that were found during the site investigation are very common in New Jersey, especially at these historic fill sites. A good part of northern New Jersey was filled back at the turn of the last century. So these contaminants are pretty common. We deal with them on a frequent basis. So I think the approach will be pretty straightforward, and we can certainly do our best to explain that so that you're all comfortable with it.
And I know you indicated this at the outset of your presentation, and that you were not involved in the closure and remediation of the asbestos landfill, but that portion of the site will not be touched at all by the developer as part of any remediation, and the development of the site. Is that your anticipation?
Yeah, that's what I anticipate. The site was and the case was closed. It's no longer a Superfund site, although there is a existing operations and maintenance plan that has to be continued to be implemented. So that would be the obligation of the property owner, but that shouldn't impact anything that we're doing in the apartment area.
Yeah, so that essentially that area will not be disturbed as part of any site development.
No, there should be no reason to disturb that area.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Do you mind if I ask another question on that point a little bit? And I hate to be, hopefully it's not too detailed, but I think with the opinion letter, that if there was any disturbance or compromise of the CAP or the Superfund site, does that transfer liability onto Prism as opposed to the state? Can you just explain that piece of it a little bit? The Superfund site is an important aspect. I'm sure folks would like to have some clarity, understanding as to what any impact could be, obviously, as even an accidental impact.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I should. That's not an area of my expertise, so I wouldn't know how to answer questions affecting liability for breaching the cap and.
Okay. I'll hold that for another conversation later. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the applicant and property owner could probably address that, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to wait, if there's other related issues, that maybe we can have them address all of them. But it's your call.
That sounds good.
We'll get an answer to your question for sure.
That's fine. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm sorry, I've been interrupting you guys enough. Please continue.
I didn't have anything else for Mr. Sullivan. I think I followed up based on some of your questions, Mr. Chairman. So I have nothing further from Mr. Sullivan at this time.
Thank you. In that case, can we turn over to the board professionals, unless there's any comment from the board in the interim? Thomas, yeah.
I have a question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
Mr. Sullivan, on one of the plans, there's a notation of a soil storage area, which looks to be on the north end of the property. You said there's asbestos in the northwest section of the area that you intend to develop. How would you make sure that any asbestos containing soil in that soil storage area is protected so it does not either leach into the groundwater or become airborne?
Okay, so this would go back to some of these plans that we would develop and would include proper soil handling procedures at a site like this. The one thing I can tell you is that asbestos won't have an effect on groundwater. It's essentially a solid, insoluble particle. So I don't think there's any fear for impacting groundwater. I think the concern with asbestos is coming into contact and becoming airborne. So so there would be practices put in place. I'm sure there will be other site documents prepared that will address all these issues. Things such as covering piles with polyethylene plastic or some other material. Soil erosion sediment control measures to prevent anything from running off of a pile. When soil is being moved, dust control measures, wetting things down, things of that nature. So yeah, there'll be very detailed processes that will be documented.
Who would document that and when?
I think it would all be done prior to any demolition or remediation, whichever begins first at the site. And they would be done by, I suppose it could be either by the consultant, EWMA, or by Stonefield, the engineer. I'm not quite sure who would take that, either or both of them.
If this application is approved within the next 2 or 3 months, the planning board is basically done with this. Who from the township would be interfacing with you to review these reports and review these processes? Because if this doesn't fall within the planning board anymore after we approve an application, so who would be responsible to coordinate with the town, and who in the town would be responsible to make sure it happens?
And that's a question.
That's a question for anybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. So if someone else wants to answer that.
That would be, I would suggest that would be the township engineer and the construction official.
Yeah.
Before I get to that, if I add, your responsibility as the licensed site remediation professional, do you have involvement in that process?
I do have some involvement in that process, and I have it at other sites. Because some of them are, some of these measures are documented in work plans or reports that go to the New Jersey DEP. So yes, I would have some involvement in them.
And all of the responsibility for all of this really falls to the property owner and developer of the property to address these remediation efforts. Is that correct?
Correct. They are the responsible entity. Yes.
And they would be done, it all would need to be done pursuant to DEP regulations.
Correct. And as I mentioned early on in my presentation, I have to certify that everything was done in accordance to the regulations and guidance that apply to the site.
And that certification is then submitted with documentation to DEP?
Yes, I have to certify everything that gets submitted to the New Jersey DEP.
With regards to the remediation of the property?
Yes, everything, investigation results, remediation efforts. And at the end, I have to certify each of the individual submittals to the DEP. The final certification I have to provide is in this RAO letter, where I certify that everything has been completed in accordance with all the regulations, and that what was completed was protective of public health and the environment.
And would that include the soil that Mr. File pointed out?
Yes, yeah, it would.
Okay, and just based on your experience, does the municipality typically have a role in this process?
I guess it depends on the municipality. Certainly we'll be collecting things like air monitoring data, and if that's of interest to the municipality, that could be provided. A lot of that will be documented in our reports that go to the New Jersey DEP. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. It depends on
information. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but the information can be provided to the municipality and the public, but they don't have any role in terms of approval or permitting for the remediation.
No, not for the remediation of the soil and the groundwater. That's any permits that would be issued would be from the New Jersey DEP.
Okay, thank you.
A follow-up question to that for our board attorney. Would a condition of approval include a requirement that all these reports and policies be submitted to the township? Is that appropriate?
I would imagine it's appropriate. I don't believe that the applicant would find issue with that or would object. Mr. Regan?
I don't believe that they would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And there is always a requirement in every board resolution that the applicant needs to comply with any outside agency having third-party jurisdiction over any application and any development within the township. So that certainly will be a condition as well.
Thank you for the answer. Appreciate it.
If I may further, I would just say that as far as the township engineer role and the construction official role, what generally happens in my experience is that, like Mr. Sullivan was saying, once the DEP approvals are in writing, it goes to the township professionals and then, to further the file for the construction permits. But again, it's the DEP that would provide the referrals the approvals to the township.
Can I, thank you for pushing on these points. Is it fair to ask that we can get some sort, because there's a lot of plans, process, responsibilities discussed in the last 10 minutes. Is it appropriate to ask maybe Ed or somebody, just put together a short document, just so we have an idea as to those steps, those plans, the consequences of some of those plans? Is that a fair request? So everybody can follow along, and when we come to the if there's a resolution, so we're clear in our own understanding as to what to expect in the coming weeks and months thereafter. Is that a fair request?
Ed, I'm not sure that it's that simple, but I would ask Ed if that's something that he thinks he could put together that we could share. I don't think we're opposed to doing it, Mr. Chairman. I just don't know how detailed something like that might need to be or not.
I was just going to say that it would have to be fairly generic document, but I think we could put something together because, you know, as you encounter different conditions at the site during the remedial investigation, you know, you have to have contingency plans and to address different things. And sometimes, you know, you make decisions as you encounter things. But in a general sense, yes, I think we could put something together.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be-
we'll try to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Could it be something along of, we call a RACI, which is like a responsible, accountable, consult, inform type kind of matrix?
Sure. I mean, I'm not familiar with that format, but I don't see why.
Okay, okay, because that would help understand where ownership may lie, or who should be spoken to, or who should be informed, or who needs to be contacted for something that's being affected. Mr. Chair, if I may ask a couple of questions. I noticed at the conclusion of your comment, you said that EMWA is going to submit a final report sometime in Q4 of 2020. How does that report affect the documentations that's been recorded in these preliminary reports? What's to be expected from that?
Well, I think what EWMA is going to do later this year is going to be the additional investigation. That's called the remedial investigation, and that's essentially the next step in investigating what was found during the site investigation. So I probably mentioned earlier that essentially if you find soil contamination, then this remedial investigation is designed to collect extra samples to be able to say, you know, the outline of where that area is, that you have it defined in 3 dimensions. How deep is the contamination? How wide is it? So that you can design your remedial action. So what they'll be doing later this year will be the actual sampling. I think any document that comes out of that would probably follow early next year. After the results come back from the laboratory, they spend some time mapping them, evaluating them, and then they prepare a report that's called a remedial investigation report.
Okay, so that's the outcome of the work that investigative work that's done in Q4. You'll actually get the physical report in, let's say, Q2 of 2021.
Exactly.
End of Q1,
Yes.
beginning of Q2 of 2021. Okay, and then
Exactly.
the property owner is obligated to remediate those areas that have been defined in that report, regardless if the application was to be approved by the board, say in the next 3 months or so. So anything found after us granting approval, they would still be obligated to anything that's found in those reports after that approval.
Yes, exactly. Any contamination, regardless of when it's found during the process, is their obligation to remediate.
Okay, so there's going to be deconstruction at the site, and there's going to be measures put in place at the site to control dust, debris, etc. Does that extend beyond the property when debris is being removed from the site? Because there'll be trucks going through residential areas as they leave the site and removing that debris.
Right. I mean, the controls wouldn't follow the trucks, but there will be measures implemented to make sure that trucks leave the facility, that they don't present any risk to anyone on their way to wherever they're going. You know, things like stone, what they call mud rub, so that the tires don't track mud out of the site. If there's any contents in the truck that could be a risk for dust, you know, make sure that the trucks are covered. The backs of the trucks are covered where the soil or the concrete may be placed. So those types of measures would be implemented on site to make sure that the trucks that go off site don't present a risk to anyone.
And what document would those measures be placed into? where would you see like these controls for like the demudding and the wrapping of the truck and so forth?
It probably would end up in several different documents. For example, the soil erosion sediment control plan would have to have some of those measures included. Things like the health and safety plan, any work plans that are generated for completing remedial action. It could be any number, and probably will be included in several different documents.
Okay. What are the penalties for breaching any of that, and who's responsible for monitoring and checking those controls that are actually being that those measures are taking place?
Well, ultimately, it would be the property owner, but I'm not familiar with what the exact penalties would be. But yeah, the property owner would be obligated.
But who's inspecting those controls that are to be in place?
There will be personnel on site. Possibly even I may have some involvement, or people from one of the engineer or the consulting firm, EWMA. Typically, we implement these air monitoring programs at the site, and would probably also document the condition of trucks leaving the site. So it's something that we do on a routine basis. So we do typically have people on site to monitor what is happening.
May I add in here that it seems to me that the trucks leaving the site and whether they are properly covered and so on, isn't that a general police powers issue under motor vehicle law, and would be enforced by whoever enforces motor vehicle law, maybe the local police department, or perhaps some other special police entity? Question mark.
Yeah, possible. That not my area of expertise, but I would imagine so. Yes.
That's all from me, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to get to the board's professional engineer in a second, but while we're on board questions, if you will, was there any other questions from board members? At this point. Okay. Michael, could I ask to turn it over to you and
Sure.
as the board's professional?
Yes, Mr. Sullivan, Michael Anzafama with Casey and Keller. Mr. Jones asked most of my questions. My concern was removal of material from the site. During the demolition of the buildings, to me, that is the most difficult time, controlling dust and air monitoring. As Mr. Jones asked, how will we be assured that that will be properly executed and we're not going to have an issue with dust being blown off the site that could possibly have contaminants in it?
Okay. Well, I think there will be a presence on site to for those monitoring and precaution efforts. I know that the some of these monitoring stations that you put on the perimeter of the property are automated and will send alarms to even someone's computer if a level of any type of particulate that we're concerned with is exceeded. So it is a fairly robust program, and there will be a presence at the site to do some oversight.
Are weather conditions taken into account? For example, on extremely windy days, will construction activities cease or demolition activities cease until such time that it would be less likely that contaminants might be blown off the site?
Yeah, I mean it's certainly possible, and we let the data guide our decisions. But yes, I have worked at sites where during windy days we did shut down operations because we did get alarms that were being set off by the perimeter monitoring stations. So it's possible, yes.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just have one quick question.
Please.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Sullivan. I was just wondering, I know you talked a lot about the apartment area, but I had questions actually about the restricted area. And I understand that there's a fence that separates them. But what if somebody, a future resident, maybe a kid, were to breach that fence and get into the restricted area? What would the sort of risk be to that person or the exposure? I understand that the restricted area has been capped, but can you explain a little bit what that means and, you know, what kind of precautions or precautionary measures have put in place to prevent that from happening?
Okay. Well, these types of areas are common. These capped and fenced-in areas. So really, all you can do is keep the fence maintained. Sometimes signs are required. I'm not sure if they are in this instance. And the cap is in place. So even if someone did reach the fence, there shouldn't be any risk of exposure to someone because the asbestos has been capped. Really all you can do is take reasonable measures to keep the fence maintained and signage and things of that nature in place.
And is the fence just a chain link fence? Is that what's proposed?
I honestly don't know. I think it's in place already, correct?
I believe there's an existing fence that has
Yeah.
been in place, I think since, I assume since the area was remediated and, you know, and the landfill closed. I believe, and I'll have to confirm this, I believe the applicant may be replacing some of the fence to more decorative type fence, but obviously would continue to provide the security that's necessary to prevent people from accessing the site.
Okay, that's my only
Our
question.
engineer can probably expand upon that when he testifies.
Okay.
Do you mind, while we're talking about the Superfund site, do you mind if we just push a little bit further on a couple of questions? Or is that not appropriate this time? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, that's fine. I mean, the only caveat is that I know Mr. Sullivan, you know, is really not involved or was not involved in the landfill. But we'll try to answer any questions that you have, and if not, we'll try to get answers.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely not addressing this to Ed, but just maybe to the other members of the applicant's team. I'm sure there'll be other times we may talk about Superfund site, but can I refer to the let me just give the title, the consent order. Is that appropriate to refer to that or not?
Sure. I think that's, you know, the administrative consent order, I believe, Ed, and correct me, I mean, does that have to do with the developed area of the site, or does that have to do with the landfill? I'm not sure myself.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Both the EPA and the New Jersey DEP can issue consent orders, so I'm not sure which entity would have issued that because I haven't seen it.
Okay. I mean, there is an administrative consent order that was signed by the property owner and DEP. But I was not involved in that, and I'll get an answer. We'll get an answer for you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if that applies to the landfill portion, or which is the restricted area, as Mr. Sullivan pointed out, or the developable area, which is what's subject to the application.
I think it's to do with the Superfund site.
Okay. You have a question beyond?
I do, and it goes back to liability.
I'm sorry, I did.
Sorry, it talks to liability.
Okay.
Redevelopment. Now, admittedly, it says redevelopment of the asbestos landfill. And I don't want to. Hopefully, this is not off left field question, but at number point 30 says, should Prism develop any portion of the asbestos landfill or otherwise compromises asbestos landfill remedy, Prism shall assume full responsibility for repairs without limitation. At some point, I'd like to just ask a bit more about what safety measures. I know that would be very accidental should something happen, I would presume, very accidental. But it seems like the liability would transfer to Prism should something impact the super, I just call it the super, I'm sorry, the cap. Is that appropriate to discuss at a future point in time?
Accurate. I think that's accurate if that's what the ACO says. I mean, they own the property. When they purchased the property, they purchased the landfill portion of the property and assumed responsibility for the operation and maintenance of that facility, as well as accepting any liability. I don't know if that answered your question, but
I'd like to understand what consequences there could be to that, because I could only imagine if something happened, there's a financial impact that could be quite large, presumptually. That's a presumption.
okay. Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that, but we'll try to get an answer for you as to what the consequences are. The ACO may address that. If not, then we'll see.
Yeah, I'd like to, because I'd greatly appreciate it if we could just have some thought into what the consequences could be if there's any accidental disturbance or compromise is the word they use, to that site or part to that site. Deb, we're reasonable on time. How do you want to handle the next discussion?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just one final question. Before, and Mr. Sullivan, this question is for you. At the very end, when everything is been remediated, you issue a certificate. If that certificate is not issued, what is not allowed to proceed? Building or people moving in? What does the inability to gain a certificate of remediation prevent the owner of the property from doing?
Typically, this type of, and I'm only pausing because there's all kinds of different situations that could develop. The letter, usually in a development situation, not always, but usually that letter, that RAO letter, is issued at the end of the project, because sometimes there may be, for example, an additional cap that might be put in place. And the cap could consist of parking lot as part of the development. So essentially, I would have to certify in that instance that the parking is an acceptable cap for contamination. So, you know, that it varies from case to case as to when that final letter is issued. That's why the only reason I'm hesitating on how to answer your question.
So before somebody can move into the apartments, that ROA, right, needs to be certified first. Is that correct? Is that a fair assumption?
That I'm not sure. And it may depend on the municipality. Maybe they have an ordinance that they don't issue a certificate of occupancy until an RAO is issued. I guess it would be dependent on the municipality.
Okay, because my concern or my questioning is more around ensuring that that site is properly remediated, that the issues with that site are properly addressed, and that the certificate is done in the right manner, so that when people are moving into that there isn't something still open that needs to be addressed. It's almost like moving into a house where you're getting a certificate of occupancy. Is kind of how I'm looking at it, but they're the same but yet different. but you can't move into the house until you have a certificate of occupancy. So I'm wondering if this is the same type of process when dealing with a site with contaminants like this.
Yeah, it's not strictly the same. It's more about certifying that a remedial action has been completed in accordance with the regulations. I mean, another example would be if you excavate out all the contamination before the development is completed, it's possible you could have one of those RAO documents issued even before the development construction begins. So it could happen at all different stages. And we do this all the time in coordination with development projects, especially residential development projects. So it is something that we do all the time in working with the various entities to make sure that everything is done at the time it needs to be done. If that helps answer your question.
Mr. Jones, I just want to add, I think Mr. Jones's question is a little simpler from my perspective. I mean, you're going to do a remedial investigation as you've described for the site, or a remedial investigation is going to be done for the site. It's going to, characterize the extent of the contamination, and then a remedial action work plan will be prepared, which essentially will say how you're going to deal with the contamination. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then then the property owner is part of the development, whether they do it before, during, depending upon the nature of the contamination, will need to address and all of the contamination, prior to completing the development, right? I mean, is that correct?
Yeah, most times, yes, unless the development itself acts as a cap, which happens.
Good. Yeah, I'm not disputing that. So I understand that they may leave contaminated soil in place, but obviously cap it so that it's, not a threat to, public health and safety. But essentially, it's all going to be addressed, prior to, the development being completed, and essentially people occupying the resident.
Right, and that's essentially what I was trying to say. Not quite as well as you just did, but yes, we do this all the time, and we work in coordination with developers.
Thank you, and I can appreciate that you're close to it, much closer to it than I am. But I think it's just important for people to know that what does that certificate mean in the big picture, and it's a pretty important piece. I consider a very important piece to the whole project. So thank you very much for articulating that. And Mr. Regan, thank you very much for simplifying that.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just one other question. I hate to. When I was looking at the plans, and I'm looking at D3, I see a reference to LSRP under monitoring wells. I just read it's demolition note number 10. Existing monitoring wells shall remain unless otherwise noted. Relocation abandonment of monitoring wells shall be done in accordance with with all applicable regulations and as directed by the LSRP of record. Okay, that's the demolition C3 point number 10. My only point of asking this question is, maybe I've missed it. I don't see many references to LSRP in the plan, and the one reference I see is very specific. I'm just trying to get a broad sense as to the responsibilities the LSRP has during this process, and we've already talked about the plans, etc. I don't see many references to the LSRP with it, and it may not be appropriate to reference, but it just struck me as just a bit of an oddity that it's referred in one place very specifically, and not generally, as I would think the LSRP has some responsibility, quite large responsibility to the process. Am I misunderstanding anything there, or is this a common practice to refer to it as in a very specific case or situation?
Yeah, on that particular plan, that may have been referencing monitoring wells because sometimes monitoring wells need to be replaced during construction and may have to be abandoned or sealed temporarily. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, the LSRP has broad oversight of everything that has to do with soil or groundwater issues at the site, including oversight of the investigations and certification of the investigations of the remedial action plan, of the remedial action implementation, of things like the health and safety issues, air monitoring, disposal, offsite disposal of any materials, concrete or soil. That's under the purview of the LSRP. So yeah, it's very broad oversight of most of the activities that are going to take place.
Good. So again, going back to that outline that you provide later, that'd be helpful because it gives me a better sense as to those responsibilities. Just me a little bit oddity that's only referred to clearly.
Mr. Hand, could you repeat that? I had trouble understanding that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just referring to the LSRP very specific instance of reference on C3 point note demolition note number 10. Whereas in this conversation, LSRP does have a broad role to play. So just clarification of that role to make sure that we're not, it's not isolated to one or two instances of oversight, but it is in fact broader and bigger than what is looked to me as only one of the few references in the plans or in the application itself. So just some clarification of the role responsibilities we discussed earlier. Ed, you're going to put something a bit more generic together, just so we know where your responsibilities lie, what plans to expect, what the process could be. I think for all our confidence in the process would be helpful.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, there is something on the borough's website, and I don't know if the applicant provided it or someone on behalf of the township put it up, but there is a 2-page overview of a licensed site remediation professional program that actually addresses the roles and responsibilities under the LSRP program. And I know you're talking specifically to this site, but I think they would apply to this site, but we'll see what we can provide you.
Yeah, I do have that, and I have looked. Yeah, I know it's in the 2 pages. It's under just so everybody at home may follow along. This is a DEP summary of TIFA. The way I find it is under the first page, under the news, on the front page of Long Hill Township, right at the very end, posted 6/5/18. It's the last item. DEP summary of TIFA. Then there's the consent order I mentioned earlier, the summary of the order, and the 2-page summary of the LSRP that you referred to, Frank. And that's fine, but I think something more specific, more tangible to this application in terms of the plans, because I don't know if the plans are referred to here as opposed to what we've discussed. So if you find something a bit more specific to this application, addresses some of the areas of this application, that would be extremely helpful, at least for me.
Okay.
And that document's 2 years old, so let's get a refresh of that.
Yeah, it's actually 2014. So
No, all right, so now we're talking almost a decade.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Frank, with that, was that the conclusion then of the testimony from your LSRP environmental?
Yes.
Thank you. Deb, I think we're doing pretty reasonable on time. I know we may normally take a break at such a time. Is that something we should consider now, or do you think we should open it up to some public questions, I think?
That's completely up to you, Chairman, and the members of the board.
Does anybody feel the need for a 10-minute break, or are we good to potentially continue.
10-minute break.
Thank you. Okay, I have it as 9:19. Can we say 9:30 to reconvene? Would that be appropriate for everybody?
Yep.
And at that point, Deb, I think we can maybe take some questions.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Okay, break starting now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deb, can you hear me? Deb?
Yep.
Just wondering, is it appropriate for people just to put their titles or their position under their names, along their names?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if it would fit. I'm
That's
not.
what I really thought, but then I just did it. I think the box probably expands. Would that be appropriate for everybody? Because
Let me see.
just try yours, put board,
Rename. Yeah. Okay. Let's see how what I can fit on there.
Thank you.
If I could spell it right. Well, it's off. Can you see? You can't see the whole secretary, right?
Yeah.
No, I can see it.
You can see it?
Yeah, I can see it. It says board secretary.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can add that, Deb. If you click on your name, go to more, and then you
Yep.
can name yourself and you can add additional information in there.
Huh.
Well, I did the rename, but I can't see it all spelled out. It stops off at.
It's on your screen now.
Oh, okay, good.
Would you mind if everybody does the same? Just abbreviation, even just for people, because there's a lot of attendees. There's a lot of panelists, as it were.
So if you go to more, where is it that I could do that under
Well,
more?
you can actually right click. You should be able. I did a right click on my box, and then it says rename.
I can't right click because I'm on my phone.
I can do it for you. Hold on.
You can do it for me, yeah. Because when I click on more, where's more?
How about that? I just did it. There you go.
Oh, you did it. Nice. And when I click on more, I can go to virtual background, raise a hand, or webinar settings. And oh, look at this, touch up my appearance. It's very useful.
Thank you. Maybe everybody else, thank you for everybody else, but Dennis, Alan, maybe PB member or something, Tom, Vice Chair, etc., etc.
John Falvey did it. Good.
Thank you. Just to help. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. We are back to recording, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I appreciate that break. Just a quick note here. I just asked folks just to put a little bit of abbreviation of title or position, because obviously there's a bunch of people that are talking, so it may be helpful. And just also to refer back to the web page, I think there's a bio listing of who's speaking on behalf of the applicant. If you go back to the same location on the website that Deb pointed to earlier, you should be able to find at least a bit of background as to who are speaking, and what their roles are. And I think it's listed. It's the first item under the web page. It's list of professionals to testify. Under you would see Ed Sullivan, LSRP, was listed first as the person to speak first, etc. So just as a reference, there's a list of folks speaking, and if we can just maybe help it along with just a title description on our tile or whatever, picture, whatever you want to call the video piece here it is. Okay, thank you for that. We're back again, 9:32. Deb, should we just then open it up to public questions? I'll leave you to monitor that if that's okay, as to how the process.
Absolutely. Yes. So for those who are not on a web link, if you are calling in on a telephone, I believe it is *9 that will allow you to raise your hand. If the members of the board or the applicant are ready, we have questions coming in. Are we ready?
Please.
Okay, and as a reminder to all members of the public, please announce your name and where you're from, i.e. Millington, Sterling, etc. Here we go. First member of the public. Should take the mute off. There we go. Hello? I have a CA on our screen. CA? A person CA, can you hear us? You're not coming through. Okay, I might have to go to the next person if we can't. I see Mr. Chairman, can you see this person up, but no response?
Yeah, I can't. So yeah, why don't you just go to the next and just to go in order? I guess Terry, I think, is next.
Yes, absolutely. All right. For now, I'll have to put this individual back there, and then we'll go back. All right. Terry Carruthers.
Good evening. Can you hear me, Deb?
Yes. Good evening, Terry.
Good evening, and Mr. Chair, good evening. My name is Terry Carruthers. I'm chairman of the Township's Environmental Commission. I would like to make a couple of comments and then have a few questions for Mr. Sullivan. My comments are about timing of this application, and I only received the actual documents for this application in about March. I didn't have a chance to present any of this to the Environmental Commission because of the COVID-19. So the Commission has not had a formal opportunity to review that. This afternoon, I started a process of looking for permission to hold a Zoom meeting on next Monday to present this material to the Commission. The other thing is, this is a very comprehensive application. It's probably the largest application that the Township has seen presented to it in quite a while. And it's very complicated. There's a lot of paperwork involved. I haven't, because of health issues, I haven't had the health or the energy to review a lot of the paperwork. And I would like to formally request that the Environmental Commission be allowed to hire its own environmental remediation expert to review our concerns, review the material and the interpretation of that material. And that this person be funded from the escrow account established to cover the cost of professional services. So that's something for you to consider our request. So my questions are for Mr. Sullivan. Good evening, Mr. Sullivan. Nice Irish name.
Good evening. Thank you.
Could I just establish what your relationship is to Prism and EWMA? Are you an employee? Are you a subcontractor? How does that work?
I am a independent consultant. The name of my company is ELS Environmental. So I am a sole practitioner, LSRP. So I would work, I work in a number of different contractual capacities. I could be a subcontractor to EWMA, which I believe I am on this one, or sometimes I work directly for property owners. So that would be my relationship on this project.
Okay, I just have a couple of simple questions in relation to the material that you presented this evening. You said that there were perched waters to be found at some of the well monitoring sites, was that correct? Or at some of the actual sites that were tested?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. And I think primarily from what I've seen, it's mostly at the northern end of the site where there was some perched water.
Okay, and you said that perched water is transient. So in what way is it transient? Does it disperse into the surrounding soils? Does it disperse into the air in some way? Or how is it transient? Do you know?
At this particular site, maybe some longer term monitoring might be necessary. I guess, a more generic statement. Typically, it is transient and dependent on the time of the year. Most of the time, you're going to see your perched water during your wetter times of the year, late winter and spring. And a lot of times, some perched water will dry up later in the year, in the summer and in the fall. And as far as where it goes, basically, it's through a process of evaporation, or what they call evapotranspiration.
Okay.
Or essentially, the soil dries up.
Yeah. How extensive is the perched water? Can you define that or clarify that?
I mean, as I'm sitting here now, I can't. Just from looking at the data from the site investigation, it just appears that there are a number of locations where they drilled and found no water. And then there were a few locations where they did find water. And perched water is common in this of geologic environment where you have a lot of finer grained soils, where sometimes water that's infiltrating from rain will essentially sit on top of some of these low permeability layers in the subsurface. So I don't have a full handle on the extent of it right now, but that'll all, of course, be part of the remedial investigation to get a better handle on the groundwater conditions.
Okay, so the perched water, though, is actually separate from the groundwater. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or could be.
Yes, it could be. There could be a separation between the perched water and the true water table. On some sites, the DEP, if perched water is extensive and actually persists year round, the DEP may enforce groundwater standards in that type of perched water. So far, it doesn't look like that's what we have here. But having said that, I mentioned that there was the free product in one area on top of this perched water. That would still have to be addressed, regardless of whether that's the true water table or not.
Okay, and could you remind me, did you find any contaminants within those perched in the areas of perched water?
I think there were some dissolved phase contaminants in that perched water as well, yes.
So are we talking about some of the polycyclic aromatic compounds that you mentioned earlier? Are you talking about VOCs? Are you talking about oil products?
I think there were some VOCs in the perched water.
Okay. So if do you know if the VOCs, if they are present, would they disperse in the same way as the water, or does that disperse into the soil typically? Is there a risk that at present is dispersing into the air during the drying out process?
Oh, is there? Yeah, that's one of the issues that we would have to look at. I touched on the issue of vapor intrusion. So that's something that we would have to look at. Now, presumably, if that area is remediated and through the process of remediation, the perched water and the dissolved phase contamination are no longer present, that there may not be any vapor intrusion concerns. But yeah, that's something that we would look at during the remedial investigation: is where is the perched water? Where might there be contamination in the perched water? And if so, is there a vapor intrusion risk? Because yes, you can get vapor intrusion off of perched water just as readily as you can off of your true water table.
Okay, and presumably there could be oils floating across the surface of that areas of perched water.
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
I presume there could be oils floating across the surface, on top of the surface of those areas of perched water when they develop that. It will probably concentrate any oils that are in the soil there.
Yes,
you're
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. If there are oils that are floating on top of the water, they're in the soil. The oil is in the soil pores between the soil particles. So yeah, essentially the soil is contaminated as well.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Sullivan, on that? I mean, is that based on the site investigation that was done, that conclusion with respect to the oil, or is that just a general statement?
Yeah, that was part of the site investigation that they did note. I think it was only in one spot, so it doesn't look like it's a large area, but there was some oil noted on one of the drilling locations up there by these former oil pits, I think they called them.
Okay.
And typically, are those areas of perched water, I would imagine as them being prisms of perched water within the soil? Would that be correct, that the profile would be some kind of elongated would they typically be fairly small areas of water or a couple hundred square feet? Do you know?
The perched water?
Yes.
On this particular site, I'm not sure yet. I think more investigation is needed, but in general, it varies from, small area of a few tens of square feet, or you could have a perched water table that's, could cover, acres.
Okay.
So it does vary.
Okay, and my next area of questioning is to do with the control of air pollutants. Some of those were addressed by previous speakers, but can you explain during the demolition process how they prevent contaminants getting into the air, typically in a large building site such as that?
Typically it's done, there's a combination of things that you do. Some are precautions and some are monitoring. The precautions would involve dust control. Typically that's just as simple as, spraying surfaces down with water during demolition. The air monitoring would be another way to not control, but to make sure that there's no adverse impacts from any dusts or vapors that might be emitted. And that would typically involve both monitoring in the work area to protect workers, and then some sort of more perimeter type program to be protective of local residents.
Because that would be our area of concern, is that the development site is at the western end of town. It's quite a large area, and if there was a lot of air contamination going on, it could contaminate a fairly large area of town. Typically, do the builders who are awarded these contracts in this kind of a situation, are they specialist builders? Do they have previous experience in this type, dealing with these type of contaminants?
I don't know how to answer that for sure. I would imagine a lot of them working in New Jersey would be, because we see these types of issues at lots of construction sites in New Jersey.
My question is really to the chair that if this does get approval, is there a way of examining what experience the builders have of doing this kind of work? Because there's a lot of room for human error here, to creep in.
Actually, maybe I could the applicants, what their, I think there's a construction, or a contractor. Perhaps you can give some details about who's actually going to do the building and to Terry's point there a little bit, what expertise do they have with contaminated sites?
I'm not sure that we're there yet, Mr. Chairman. I mean, Prism is obviously an experienced developer. They've developed, all over in, North and Central Jersey. They're going to hire responsible contractors who have experience in, in building these kind of projects. I mean, this is a fairly, I say simple in terms of, I think the construction, of the project that's proposed, and the remediation, they'll obviously need to hire responsible contractors. I mean, it's ultimately incumbent upon Prism to do that.
And the fact there's an LSRP in the process, independent, is oversight to ensure that some of these, just to monitor the progress. And so, am I presuming too much that between the LSRP itself, the applicant, developer, that this will be handled I'm sure, in a very cordial and professional manner?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to go on. There's two pieces to it, I think. And Ed, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there may be the need for a contractor that specializes in environmental remediation. And then there's obviously the contractor that's going to do site improvements and construct the building. So I think there's multiple layers of contractors that will be involved in this project, starting with, the environmental remediation. And it's ultimately up to Prism to make sure that they hire, responsible, licensed contractors. And I'm sure they have those relationships based on the work that they've done in other parts of the state where they've encountered environmental issues.
Right, and the contractors who would do any remediation work, they have to be licensed. They have to have sufficient health and safety training from OSHA. So yeah, they are qualified to do the work that they're hired to do.
Thank you.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman, but I would repeat my request, particularly as the Mayor is present. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. That we be allowed to hire our own environmental expert to review some of this material and perhaps to address concerns that members of the public may also have, and that this be funded from the escrow account, which is established to cover the cost of such professional services. That's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. That's something that we can certainly discuss. Just actually, Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question in that regard?
Of course.
Mr. Sullivan, there has been some talk about the town hiring its own LSRP and as a to work alongside, or at least to report back to the town and interpret the work that's been done in the findings. Have you worked with that in that kind of arrangement in the past? Is it a common arrangement? Is it in your experience of if you have worked with it in the past, is it one that actually works?
I have worked in those types of relationships in the past, and I would have no problem whatsoever with it. Sometimes two minds are better than one, and I would welcome the input.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have one question for Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Carruthers brought up perimeter protection, and on one side of the property, the Tifa location, we have the Passaic River. So I would like to hear a little more about what we can do or what's going to be done to protect and safeguard the waterways that travel alongside the Tifa site.
Okay, well, I think all of those types of measures would probably be addressed with the soil erosion sediment control plans to prevent runoff. At this particular site, given that the restricted area is between the apartment area and the river, I think essentially in a lot of ways it would act as a buffer, so to speak, to prevent any issues. I mean, my understanding right now is that there haven't been any documented impacts to the surface water or the sediments in the river from the prior site operations. So I think with the proper controls that are routine, sites like this, I I think that the waterways will be protected.
Okay, I know Stonehouse Road is south of the Tifa site, and the grade flows towards the river there. So I guess my expectation would be that safeguards would be put in place to ensure that water isn't traveling down or sediment is eroding down that roadway. Having biked up that road, the water can pick up a little bit of speed and head off and make its way down into that river. So I would expect that controls are put in place to safeguard the waterways as well as the community that surrounds it and uses the waterways.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Should we go on to next member?
Yes. So our next individual from the public is Kathy O'Leary. Kathy?
Actually, it's Tom O'Leary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just want to pick up on.
Sorry, can I get that name again? This is not Kathy O'Leary. Who is it?
It's Tom O'Leary.
Tom O'Leary. Thank you.
Yeah, I live on Division Avenue in Millington, and Mr. Ozafama hit on it, was in terms of, I guess the biggest potential for release of airborne is when you do the demolition. And as I understood your answer, I guess, you're going to decide what type of airborne monitoring will be used to detect, right? And that has yet to be decided, but you're going to make that determination as you get into the project. Is that fair?
Yeah, that would happen, before the project starts. And that's the type of specialty service that I'm not a real expert on air monitoring. So we would bring in some sort of specialty contractor who specializes in that type of work to do that.
So you'd sub that work out in terms of developing that air monitoring plan, I guess?
Typically, yes. Yep.
Okay. And now I guess from your standpoint, is there discretion in terms of, the type of air monitoring selections that you would employ? Do you have discretion to use the type of air monitoring you want to use or select?
Yeah, absolutely. And as an LSRP, I'm not expected to be an expert on every aspect of a remediation, but I am expected to bring in expertise as needed. And this is the type of situation where I think special expertise would be needed.
Yeah, and I can appreciate where you're coming from, and I understand that. And as I understand the LSRP program, kind of, you're basically, for lack of a better term, though, in terms of the cleanup of the site, the kind of buck stops with you, and you're kind of putting your license on the line to make sure it gets done correctly. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah, there's a licensing board. There's a code of conduct. There are all the regulations and guidance that an LSRP is expected to follow. So yes,
Yes, but in terms of the actual going on in the site, I guess the town doesn't really get into that. It's really kind of your call as a professional. Is that fair?
Yeah, for the remediation aspects, yes.
Yeah, I guess the one concern I have, and this is kind of something I put out to the chair of the board, is just, I understand there's an intersection, I think, between the role of the town and the LSRP, and I'm not suggesting the town should intrude on the LSRP's, authority or purview, but in terms of, I know Mr. Lanzafama professionally, and I have a lot of trust in him. And I would just ask as a condition of approval that in terms of any sort of preliminary monitoring plan, that, at least be run by him, and to make sure he gets his sign off on that, just from a health and safety standpoint from the town, from outside of the site. I think it would just give a lot of the residents, or it would certainly give me a lot of comfort. And I don't think that's a big ask, but I just wondering if that could be a condition of approval. Throw that out there.
Sounds reasonable to me. Frank,
yeah, I'm just, whatever the plan is that he comes up with, I just would like him to run it by Mr. Lanzafama. And, if he has, I know him professionally, and if he's he's comfortable with it, that would give me a lot of assurance, and I think hopefully it would give the residents assurance too.
Could I, Mr. O'Leary, given your experience in this type of work, is this something that you've found to be common? Because I know you've had some experience in, or your other firms at least that you've worked with have
Yeah, I mean,
in this. Is this common? Is this something that you find is a common occurrence?
Well, see, the way I look at it, there's two ways you can kind of skin this cat, Brendan. I mean, you could do the township could do a developers agreement, and then as part of the as a condition of approval, you can have your own environmental consultant go out and do the inspections looking at it from a health and safety standpoint, or like spot checks, for lack of a better term, and have the developer funded out of the escrow. Or alternatively, if you maybe put a perimeter monitoring thing out there, maybe my biggest concern is really the airborne. You have it run it by the engineer. I mean, I think, you have the discretion to do whatever you want. I think it's reasonable. But I mean, typically I could tell you though, I've done where I've been construction counsel for a number of projects in the order running a range of $50 to $60 million in terms of about a volume of the work that's being put in. And a lot of times, the developer will have its own engineer, will do its own testing for compaction, stuff like that, and make sure the work in place is going in and it's okay, and it conforms with the specs. But the township typically does its own inspections just to verify, and more in the name of spot check, and the developer usually funds that out of the escrow. So that was the thought. I mean, just from the standpoint of just have some sort of sign off in terms of the perimeter monitoring from an airborne standpoint, just to kind of, because that's my biggest concern. And then, I guess, I have faith in Mr. Sullivan that he'll do what he says he's going to do. But I mean, it's just might be a little long winded there, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, just one other question too, Mr. Sullivan, too. In terms of when you're talking about remediation of the site, I take it really one of the remedial options is really to leave it in place and cap in place. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's always one of the options. Yep.
Yes. So if there's asbestos in the site, people should not understand. It's not like it's necessarily going to be removed. It might be just capped in place. Is that fair?
Yes, and you probably know that there aren't really any soil standards related to asbestos in New Jersey. You could default to some of the EPA sort of standards or guidelines. So you may not necessarily have to cap asbestos in soil, but it's something that we would have to look at as the remedial investigation progresses.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is I just did a job where they took out 20,000 tons of asbestos contaminated debris, and it was $2.4 million to haul it off. I suspect if you can keep it in place and comply with the technical regulations, you'll do that as opposed to a haul off situation. Is that fair? I'm not saying it could be that much.
Yeah, that's fair. Yes.
Okay. And that's really the point I was making. Okay. Thanks. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Tom. Can I just ask, going back to Ed, that schedule, if you will, see as Tom mentioned, is it appropriate to say within that plan, there's a number of different things that you said, and we just heard the airborne, we had health and safety. Is there a column there you can say this plan probably warrants some sort of review by whether it be a township LSRP or the board planner, engineer? Is there steps that you may say, just for safety's sake, why not have that second pair of eyes on it?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I would say it would really be up to whoever is working on behalf of the municipality. They look at a list of documents and decide which ones he or she wants to review.
Can I, Ed, I mean, I think you've said this numerous times. At the end of the day, you're the one certifying to the remediation, correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, the idea of the township hiring their own LSRP, they're more than free to do that if they want to pay for it. I don't think it's appropriate for the redeveloper or the developer to pay for it out of escrow. You know, the property owner has an obligation to remediate the site if they're going to develop it. They hired an LSRP who is responsible for overseeing that remediation. I don't know, you know, as I said, if the township hired someone, I don't think that the applicant, you know, would necessarily have a problem consulting with them. But at the end of the day, I think it's Mr. Sullivan's decision as to, you know, how the remediation is carried out, because he ultimately has to certify to it.
Right. So ultimately, yes, I have to certify to it and justify what has been done. And the one thing that I guess that we should also touch on is that even though the LSRP is making the decisions, it's not in a total vacuum. The New Jersey DEP still does review submittals from the LSRP. So you know, I have to make sure that whatever I approve and certify is also going to pass the muster of any review that the DEP may do.
And I absolutely understand where you're coming from, Frank. That's certainly not a concern. But what I would like to, again, going back to the plan, I'd like to have some comfort and put aside who's paying for it and for a second, right? Where's the appropriate places for it? Should we say a third party to take a look at stuff, where it be the port, and again, I'm not worried about the money, who's paying for it right now. I'd just like to get a sense as to where those sensitive points are. We heard from Mr. O'Leary, there's one very sensitive point about the airborne. But I'd just like to make sure we acknowledge that and have an understanding of how we're going to address that. And maybe we don't do anything. Maybe the township does something, not sure. But I think it'd be helpful to have that discussion.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be opposed to that. I mean, I don't know enough about the air monitoring, but obviously, and Ed, feel free to elaborate, but an air monitoring plan, I assume that there are regulations, whether it's at the state or federal level, you know, that have to be implemented to ensure that any monitoring program complies with those regulations. So I don't think, is that accurate, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, again, air monitoring specifically is a little outside of my realm. But yeah, I mean, there are regulations and or guidelines, probably both on a state and a federal level.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I might intervene, I think to Mr. O'Leary's point, it's about consultation and a comfort level. So just reaching out to our health and safety advisor, just to consult with, can go a long way. It'll add transparency and give comfort that you know, the concerns of the residents are being addressed in a holistic manner. So I think that's the approach that's trying to be conveyed here.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
Cheers.
Okay, Deb, who's next on the?
Next we have Mike Smart. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. I apologize. Mike S. Unmute yourself. Ask to unmute.
Hello?
Yes, Mike S.
Yeah, Mike Smarjassi, Millington, New Jersey.
Thank you.
And just a question for Mr. Sullivan. In response to the I believe it's the second, maybe the first or second question from the public, you stated that you essentially don't have a full handle on what is currently at the site in terms of contamination, and that we need the remedial investigation to really get a handle on that. But the remedial investigation report's not available till 2021, I think is what you said earlier. So is it correct kind of to state that report really provides us with a much better understanding of what's at the site versus what we know today?
I think a more complete picture The site investigation does give you enough information so that you know in general what types of contamination you're dealing with and possibly how widespread it is. So in this particular situation, I think there is a fairly good handle on what we're probably going to be dealing with for remediation. It's just a question of sort of fine tuning the areas and volumes of contamination, things of that nature.
Is it common for the board to have a remedial report before making a decision on the application? It just seems a little backwards. Before I build, I perk my soil to see if I can get a septic. So wouldn't I want, as a board, as the public, to have that remedial report first?
Is that something you want me to?
Well, I don't, is it, when you've had other applications like this, so, I mean, is that report usually available when you file when you come to testify before a board?
Ed, don't answer that. I'm not sure that it's appropriate for Mr. Sullivan to answer that. He indicated he had never testified before a planning or zoning board before.
Oh, I missed that earlier. All right, I'll save that question for someone later. One additional one, and then I'll be done. The current site, the apartment area, is already essentially 100% impervious. It is all building or pavement today. So it's been essentially capped for decades. When you open up that cap, does that give you any concerns, or do you believe it could create any other potential issues as the site is developed?
Again, that's sometimes you do have issues arise during development. There should be contingencies in place to deal with them. Most of the time, though, when you remove a building, most of your contamination is going to be outside of the building areas. Not always, but typically won't find as much contamination under a building because essentially, like you said, it's been a cap for so many decades that the contamination hasn't been discharged or migrated underneath the building.
All right, thank you.
No further questions?
No, that's it. I would just hope that the board will consider asking for the remediate report and its findings before making a decision. I think that's a very valuable tool and critical information to have.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we are moving on to Dave. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, this is actually Christina Berquist.
Christina, can you spell your last name for us, please?
Berquist.
I'm sorry, one more time, a little slower.
Berquist.
Thank you. And you are from where?
Millington, River Road.
Okay.
Christina, is your first name with a C or a K?
With a CH.
Thank you.
So I wanted to address the question to Mr. Sullivan. I have a question regarding, I'm a little bit confused on some of the things that you were saying earlier with regards to the investigation found at the site preliminarily. So I wanted to clarify first. You said you've taken your findings mainly from the reports of the EWMA and the stone field. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you didn't actually, were you actually on that site yet?
No, I haven't been actually on the site yet. I was only retained a short while ago. So I'm going the existing reports.
Okay. And so those reports were done, and all your findings that you were stating were from, I recall when you were counting up some of these numbers was from EWMA, right?
Correct.
And there was a lot of, I found there to be a lot of like there may, and the levels are relatively low as far as contaminants, and you know, there were a lot of like limited asbestos and relatively low. What are the actual, I mean, I know you said they're in an appendix, which is not available to the public, so I get it. I don't see that yet. I'm hoping that will be made available. But what levels are there that you mentioned also that there are no soil standards related to asbestos in New Jersey? Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so then what levels would we be going by as, you know, as concerned citizens? I do have children, and I'm very concerned living so close to the site that, you know, the health and safety of my family and all the families around us are going to be taken into account. This appears to be a very large site. You know, the documents are, I mean, very large to even just go through and make myself an idea as to what I'm actually up against here. I'm not feeling terribly comforted by all these, you know, maybes and possiblies. So what are the EPA standards? You mentioned there's EPA standards for asbestos related to the soil or to the air. What are those limitations?
So first I should say I'm not really an expert on asbestos. I know some from dealing with it on other sites. So it may not be a question that I can answer tonight as far as what exactly what other guidelines or standards they may be for asbestos in soil. I think that as we develop our remediation approach, all those sources would be considered, and we would use what was the sort of appropriate approach for addressing any asbestos in soil. I'm sorry I can't give you details, but that's, you know, how the process would work. You know, we identify all of the potentially applicable guidance and regulations and standards.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I understand. I just find that a little bit scary on my end as a mother, and, you know, like I would like to know what we're dealing with here. And also the other question I had was earlier when you explained about, you know, what the typical procedures are for the cleanup going from, you know, going from like areas of concern to site investigation and then the remedial investigation. You said eventually all problem areas would be removed. Now I saw there was 22 problem areas identified in the report. So are all these going to be removed?
No, because of the process I was talking about, how you sort of winnow down the list.
Uh-huh.
And you're only required to remediate those areas where you have documented contamination that that New Jersey regulations would mandate that you clean them up.
But if New Jersey doesn't have any regulations with regard to soil contamination for asbestos, like, are there actually any regulations in place that would mandate cleanup and removal of asbestos-containing materials?
I mean, there are, I think, more federal type guidelines and numbers that may or may not apply.
And do you have to follow, you as like the LSRP, do you have to follow the federal guidelines, or are they just sort of, like, I'm not too familiar, honestly, with this whole process of the you know, the different entities of government, but is the DEP and essentially you as an LSRP obligated to be under the EPA or just side by side?
No, we would not be under the EPA at all on this.
Okay.
What an LSRP can do is where there is not any New Jersey standards or guidance. You can look to other jurisdictions that might have guidance and maybe follow that guidance if there is federal guidance, for example. I'm sorry I'm not directly answering your question here. I think that this is an issue that we're going to have to evaluate as the process moves along.
Right. Okay. And would the town be responsible for obtaining some of these other guidelines, or would that be Prism as the developer?
I think it would be more of the purview of the LSRP, I think, to identify anything that might be applicable, to fill in any gaps in the New Jersey DEP guidance.
So essentially Prism.
No.
You're working for Prism?
Ed, you're guided. You're guided by DEP rules and regulations, correct?
Correct.
Any remediation, any investigations that you undertake associated with this property, and any remediation that ultimately will be taken will be in accordance with all DEP rules and regulations, which is the State of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, correct?
Correct.
But you just said there weren't any regarding asbestos containing soil.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that there are any soil standards. I don't believe there are.
Okay, well, I mean, I do find that very concerning, and I would, really appeal to our town to, piggyback off what Mr. Smarjassi said earlier, to really look for the next stage of the findings to really be able to evaluate what we're dealing with before moving forward in this building project. Because, and somebody else had just identified that earlier. You said there is, and this is only the soil right now. And on the soil note too, I wanted to know, you said that the mound between what's currently there, the warehouse building and the river would be a barrier for the river, right? For any runoff, you said?
I think I was referring to the former landfill area.
Right. So you said that sort of acts as a barrier or as a buffer, I think you said, between, the river and whatever is in the ground on that site.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with the landfill per se. It's just good to have any piece of property between where you're doing earthwork and a body of water. Because if you can imagine, if you're doing work directly on the riverbank, there's a greater risk of something running off into the river. That was my only point.
So is that mound essentially, I don't know exactly what, I've read through what was put in place to cap that contaminated dump site, but is that mound right now essentially non-permeable, or?
I'm not familiar with the specific details of the cap over the asbestos area, so I can't answer that.
It says that there's top layer soil for 6 inches, and then there is some rock, and then there is a bio textile. So I'm not familiar with biotextiles and that. I was just trying to find out if that's currently able to, if water currently is able to permeate through that into the river.
Mr. Sullivan is not qualified to answer that because he wasn't involved in the landfill closure.
Okay, well, but somebody from the town, I guess, would be able to answer that. Is that correct? Somebody who's reviewed that. I saw the EPA report.
Yolanda?
Is the town considering that that mound, that cap mound, a water permeable surface or not?
Well, that's not really the board's jurisdiction. You would have to speak with the township engineer to discuss that. The planning board doesn't have jurisdiction over that.
Okay. All right, that's fair enough. And my last question was just as far as the demolition of this project goes. You mentioned, really the biggest problem with asbestos might be the air contamination and the particles floating in the air. did you say that the developer would be responsible for putting safety measures in place to monitor what's being hauled off the site?
Wait, could you phrase that again? I'm sorry.
I was referring to the demolition, if once the project starts, the demolition of it and taking potentially contaminated materials, including asbestos, off the site for removal. Somebody else had addressed it earlier. I believe, I'm not sure anymore who addressed it, but the trucks would be going through residential areas. I know you said there would be this cleanup of the muddy tires and all that, and there would be, typically there is I don't know, whatever is over the truck beds so nothing can float away.
I think he addressed that.
I'm sorry?
I think he addressed that question already. And I mean, you just recounted what he said.
Well, I'm asking for the simple reason that I have driven numerous times behind trucks, hauling things away, and, dust and things were falling off left and right. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with what the standards are for that. And I would like to know if there are actual, higher standards in place than just putting a screen over soil that's being hauled away. We do have an elementary school right down the street from the construction site, and it is concerning what could potentially enter the air and, expose a lot of children to that.
Well, if it helps, the one thing I can add to my earlier explanation is if your particular concern is asbestos, there shouldn't be any asbestos material in the demolition material. If there is any, that's all safely removed prior to any demolition. So any trucks carrying demolition material off-site, there shouldn't be any asbestos in that material.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Christine, do you have any more questions?
Not for the moment, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would ask at the hour at 10:25, do you want to take some more questions? At this time, we would need a motion to continue on.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realize time escaped me there. But how many people we got lined up for questions?
Right now, 1, 2, 3, 4 that have not asked questions yet.
I'm wondering, because of the hour, whether we could continue. It sounds like there's a couple of to-dos as well. Would it be appropriate, or maybe I'll just ask the board and the applicant, is this something we would want to move to a next meeting, or is everybody comfortable to continue on for a little bit longer?
Mr. Chair, before we ask the applicants, do we have any limitations on the recording?
We do not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we're fine with continuing. It's up to you and the board.
I suggest that we stop. You've only got, you've got 4 minutes. You're not going to get through 4 questions.
I would be fine with staying on for a little while longer, especially just before questions. If we extended it, we could probably do it by within another half hour.
Yeah, I echo that. I'm good with extending.
I vote with Alan. I prefer to stop tonight.
All right. I need a tiebreaker.
I'm good with saying people waited this long to ask their questions. If we could get them in, I'd like to try to get them in.
Extend it.
On the other hand, CA hasn't been heard from yet.
He's two in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not sure that he's able to configure himself to talk. And he will.
Don't worry about when we get to that.
Why don't we, Deb, why don't we just cap it at who are the 4 people that you have lined up on the to speak?
Currently, who have not spoken, there is a Stella Caprio, a CA2, a John Caputo, and Kathy O'Leary.
So that's 4, right? Did I count that right?
Correct, 4.
Okay, can we limit it to those 4 then? And then could I ask for extension until 11 o'clock?
Well, you can do it whatever you like, as long as we have a motion A second, and it passes.
I think that's reasonable. Second.
Who motioned to extend?
I did.
Brendan, thank you. And
I
second?
seconded it.
Thank you, Victor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Raise your hands. Just 2 opposed. The ayes have it.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay,
Democracy at its finest.
All right, so the next individual from the public, we will welcome Stella Caprio. Stella?
Yes, this is actually Joe Caprio, her husband.
Okay.
Okay,
Can you spell your first name, please?
sure, Joe, J-O-E, Caprio.
Okay. And
And
you are
we're in
from-
Millington.
Thank you.
And I have 2 questions for Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, based on our discussion just prior regarding the building, based on the past use of that building, being a building material manufacturer and the years that they were manufacturing building materials, have you looked at quantifying the sheer volume of the potential asbestos-containing materials that exist in the building right now? Have you identified between the sheetrock, the plaster, the mortar that was used between the bricks, whatever it may be, but back in those times, frequently they did put asbestos in those materials. So just that, our main concern is the dust control, the air pollutants, and when that demo occurs, that going airborne living so close to the site. So my question would be, have you evaluated that, or do you plan to evaluate that based on just that sheer volume of potential asbestos-containing materials in the building?
Okay, so the removal of asbestos materials that are part of the building construction, that's a little bit out of my purview, but the typical process is that an asbestos review is done prior to building demolition, and that any asbestos-containing material would be safely removed from the building prior to the overall demolition taking place.
Excellent. That's great to know. So you guys would go through, you would evaluate it, and then you would give a recommendation back to Prism of this is what we feel, what we tested or what we feel could be potentially asbestos-containing material.
Right, and it may be a specialty contractor that typically does that type of evaluation and testing of the material in the building, and then the safe removal of that material.
That's great. No, that's my question, because I'm actually a developer myself. We've developed quite a few historic properties, and we always hire a licensed asbestos abatement company before any demo to come in and dismantle those types of potential problems or potentially asbestos-containing material.
Yep,
So
that'd be the
by doing
process
that,
here.
you're basically limiting it to when the demo happens, it's really going to come from the soil that we're concerned about, not the actual building.
Well, I'm not sure any soil would be disturbed during the demo. I don't think that other than grading activities and maybe
So
remediation.
are you guys potentially looking at a slab on grade versus driving pilings into the ground? As far as your foundation?
That I couldn't answer.
No, because if you're slab on grade, you're not disturbing the soil. But if you're driving into the ground or footings, you are disturbing it. So would that, I guess that's another question. Would that be part of the assessment that you would do before you started building?
It would be, yes.
Okay. Okay, great. And that's kind of, I guess, back to the woman that just spoke before me, having this information prior to actually starting this work. Just for us to have a safe feeling that it's going to be contained, the sheer volume of asbestos that we're dealing with, and having little children, and we love our neighborhood, we love our town. We don't want to leave, but it's just very scary. So having those things answered. And then the last thing, would you recommend, as far as the demo, obviously you don't get everything when you do remove asbestos, there is room for error. Will you be recommending a licensed asbestos abatement contractor to do the full-blown demo? Because I'll tell you, I'm a contractor, and there's a fine line between, we have great all types of subs that we work with. And the guys that really do it day in and day out and understand abatement contracting and understand asbestos, those guys really have a, from their supers down to their foremans, down to the lead guys, swinging the big rigs and knocking things down. You see a big, and a lot of times I work with many LSRPs and guys like you, and they recommend it. They put the liability back on us, that if you don't use it, it's on you. And we don't have to share that with anybody. That's for our discretion. But at least we know, and that's where I guess my question for you would be, would you recommend a New Jersey certified asbestos abatement contractor to do the demo, knowing the sheer volume of what this site used to be?
I mean, I personally think that's outside of the sort of purview of the LSRP. I think that would be more a question for the property owner and the engineer on the project.
That's fair. No, that's fair, because I typically would hire an environmental service, like a liability management company to advise me on how to limit my risk. So that makes sense. Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. We'll move on to CA2. CA2, you're up.
Can you hear me? Charles Arentowitz.
We can hear you, Mr. Arentowitz. Yes.
I've gone to a different computer. I love these Zoom meetings because technology gets tested. I can't wait to get in public.
Yeah.
I've got a number of questions for Mr. Sullivan.
Could you spell your last name, sir?
Sure. It's ARENTOWICZ.
Thank you.
Deborah, if you could pull up the first exhibit on the applicant's list of professionals to testify, that would be helpful.
You want me to
Pull it up? Yeah, the first
the list of professionals to testify?
Right.
Sure. Okay.
Mr. Sullivan, would you clarify, based on what's written there, I'm still confused, even though the prior testimony, what your role is, who hired you, and who are you working for?
Okay, on a contractual basis, I was retained by EWMA, not retained, but hired by EWMA.
Okay, so you're working as a consultant to EWMA, is that correct?
Correct.
Prior to today's testimony, who have you talked to at EWMA regarding this site?
I've had discussions with their project manager.
Francis Rooney?
No, he's the former LSRP. Her name is Mindy. I don't know why her last name is escaping right now. Also with some discussions with John Richardson.
Okay, was that recent?
Yeah, within the last few weeks.
Yeah, he was on this planning board. He's also on the master plan committee. He's recused himself, rightly so. Are you aware that on this property, on the apartment area of the property, the prior owner in 2015 had a sewer main break between building 3 and 4? Okay. They got a contractor in there and fixed the sewer leak. However, a person from the EPA who works in the Emergency and Remedial Response Division came in there and said, "What's going on here?" They hit asbestos when they hit the sewer line and hit a lot of it, and went up in the air. No one controlled it. And the EPA had a conversation with our town administrator. They had a discussion with the contractor, said this is not permissible of what you did, and this should never have been done in the contamination that was released into the air. After hearing your testimony tonight about these 22 AOCs, these are all common contaminants. Do you consider asbestos a common contaminant?
I was referring to the non-asbestos contaminants when I said that.
So how would you classify asbestos?
I mean, you don't see it all the time. I have seen it at a couple of my sites that I've worked on. And the scenario that you just mentioned, that's precisely why we put plans in place ahead of time so that that does not happen during the construction activities.
So this plant that manufactured the asbestos, there's asbestos under the pavement, without a doubt. It was demonstrated in 2015. The EPA they couldn't believe it happened, okay, how they did this, and the contractor and the town and everything else. You should also be aware that we've had at least 2 areas where we've had asbestos remediation. Both areas that I'm aware of were around an area of South Main.
This is not the time to testify.
Yes, it's critical to what the example is and how it relates to this problem.
Go ahead.
How it relates to this remediation. What they did, they capped the one place. The other area, they removed some of the asbestos, but they did have 2 to 3 air monitors. There is no way, and it's the same asbestos because it came from this plant. There's no way you're going to be able to take this asphalt cap off and not hit the asbestos and not need air monitors, and you're going to either have to extract it, wet it down, or whatever.
And
So when you said the common thing, and you said this about asbestos, there are major issues here. Of the 22 areas of concern, how many of those relate to asbestos?
I don't believe any of them specifically relate to asbestos.
Well, they mention a term that's, what is it? Asbestos in the material. I forget the term exactly. ACM? What is that?
Asbestos containing material.
Okay. That's one of the AOCs. Just one of them.
Right.
So I think you need to take a look at, I was citing those 2 examples to see what they did to remediate, the EPA, to remediate asbestos that came from this plant in this facility.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just repeat that, we, as part of the process of remediation and construction, we'll have plans and safeguards in place to address anything that we encounter.
There are 7 monitoring wells on the 2 sites, 2 of which are on the apartment site. I didn't see anywhere in your comments or what's going to happen to the 2 wells, monitoring wells that are on the apartment site of this location.
You mean what's going to happen during?
Are you going to cover them up in construction? What are you going to do to keep them open?
The approach that you use for monitoring wells, excuse me, during construction varies. If they are in an area where it's not possible to save them, they have to be sealed up and then later reinstalled after construction. So you save them if you can, but if you can't, you have to seal them and then reinstall them.
Have they been identified anywhere and what documents have been submitted? Are you aware of any? Because I couldn't find it.
As far as where they are?
No, yeah, on any of the diagrams that were submitted, plans.
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
Who, I hope somebody can. Does anybody know from the applicant?
I didn't hear the entire question.
Where are the two monitoring wells in the apartment area of the site, and where are they on the diagrams?
We'll have to locate them and then point them out at a subsequent meeting. I don't know that anybody.
They're
knows.
very important to us, as they should be to you.
Okay.
Well, like I said, if it makes you feel any better, though, if those wells are damaged or have to be removed for construction, suitable replacement wells will be installed.
On this phase 2 remediation investigation, that's going to be due in the fall of this year?
That's my understanding, yes.
And the PASI was issued in March of 2019? 2018, 2019?
I believe so, yes.
Do you know when that was originally due?
I don't know.
Does anybody know from the applicant?
No.
Okay. It was due in November of 2018. They were 5 months late. What confidence level do we have that in the fall that we're going to have phase 2 completed? I didn't hear a response.
I don't know what response you're looking for.
I'm looking for it. There's a 10% chance it's going to make it. There's a 50% chance it's going to make it. It's not going to make it.
I think Mr. Sullivan said he expects it in the fall of 2020. That's the best we can do at this stage.
I'd like something better than that. Mr. Sullivan, your 30 years experience, you've worked with developers and so forth. We've got a situation here where in phase 1 is done. It was 5 months late. No one knows exactly when we're going to get phase 2. How do you advise a developer to buy this property and take on these risks when you don't know what's below the ground?
That's not my role at this point.
I'm saying from your 30 years experience, I mean, you throw darts? What do you do to figure out how much this is going to cost to remediate what's below ground?
Ed, there's no need to answer that. He was not involved in the acquisition of the property by Prism. He didn't advise.
But what I'm asking is 30 years experience. He's worked with multiple developers, I'm sure. Has he not?
I have, yes.
Let him answer the question.
What's the question?
The question is, how do you provide advice on the unknowns of this potential contamination to your client?
He wasn't asked, he wasn't hired to do that, so it's not appropriate.
I'm asking him based on what he is today.
Well, he's not going to answer it because the applicant owns the property and he was hired to oversee the remediation as it currently exists. And it's not necessary for him to ask that question.
He's the expert.
But it's irrelevant to his testimony.
It's not irrelevant because I want to see the potential here of how you weigh this risk. We've got residents here that are concerned on their health and safety. And if it becomes a big cost, does he walk away? It's relevant. I disagree.
You can disagree. Ed, don't.
Thank you. Wish we had these meetings in person.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned with the lead-in that these are common issues. They're not common issues. We have major issues here with remediation. And no one seems to be worried about it. Thank you for your time tonight. No more questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we hear from Pam Ogens? We have not heard from Pam yet.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
Okay, Pam? Pam, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, does it work now?
Yes, we can hear you, Pam.
Go ahead.
Let me just, can you still hear me?
That's better.
Yes.
Okay, I just had to switch over from the phone, but I am getting feedback. Are you getting that as well?
We are not.
Okay, then I'll just live with it. Okay, I've reviewed the EWMA preliminary assessment site investigation. Am I correct in assuming that this is not a remediation plan?
No, it is not.
Okay. I would just like it for the record that Mine Hill Township Planning Board recently rejected an application for development which included affordable housing because no remediation plan was provided.
Well, the planning board doesn't know the details of that case, and the planning board is only permitted to look at the application that's before them. So I would have to advise the board that that's irrelevant. You don't know anything about that case. So could you please limit your questions to the LSRP, to Mr. Sullivan's testimony?
Okay. I don't have question for Mr. Sullivan. I would feel better with someone who had more experience in asbestos remediation. I don't doubt that he's qualified. He is an LSRP, but it's sort of like being an ICU nurse working in labor and delivery.
Thank you, Pam. Is that the end of your question, comment?
That's it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, 10 minutes, shall we take? Now we have Terry Carruthers. I'm sorry, John Caputo, I believe, is here. Did we?
Has John spoken before? Don't think so, right?
John Caputo. All right, let's try John.
Let's just try John. Yeah.
John?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for extending the meeting. We appreciate your time. First, I'd like to make a point. Some of the information available.
Well, I'm sorry, sir. This is questions only?
Okay.
Of the applicant of the witness, Mr.
Okay.
Sullivan?
It was an administrative question. We noticed that the tables and soil boring logs weren't uploaded to the website. Could those be added to before the next meeting?
What tables what are you talking about?
The tables and soil boring logs that go with the site investigation.
Tables and soil, yeah.
I've got it. I know because the appendices and the figures were not in the MA report that was uploaded. So
we can provide all those.
Thank you. That's a comment I was going to make as well.
I didn't realize they
Okay.
wanted.
The question I wanted to ask Mr. Sullivan, given the testimony that we've heard tonight, first of all, I'm a neighbor. I'm a resident of Millington. I'm a practicing architect as well. I've been through this process, but more in the passenger seat. But for the benefit of the board, could you explain the process, the decision-making process for the methodology by which soils would be determined to be removed remain in place as far as the process of excavation for each individual building goes. So would this be done all at once? So it would, the current proposal would be is for 14 buildings. Would 14 building pads be prepared and brought down to the footing level? And would then the soils be tested individually, for example, or would it be done on a case-by-case basis? Let me just say why I'm asking. I'm concerned as a neighbor with such a large and potentially costly excavation of what you would call a stalled site. There's 130,000, and correct me if I'm wrong, 130,000 square feet of building area. And while I can't view the soil logs, the boring logs, I don't believe any soil borings have been made under any of those buildings. So that's potentially 130,000 square feet of site area that where we don't know what we would find. So that's the first question for Mr. Sullivan. And then after you answer that, I would like to ask the board if the possibility of a performance bond or other kind of bond has been floated in case of economic conditions changing, so that a project like this wouldn't be left half completed.
Well, I can tell you that performance bonds are calculated by the township engineer once the project goes through the permitting process. So we can't really speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to?
Could
I
Mr.
can answer
Sullivan
your.
walk through the decision
I can
process?
answer. Yeah, I can answer your question. So the process that we follow is driven by these AOCs that we've been talking about, areas of concern. And so we investigate these areas, and then as necessary, this will be the next step, you sort of expand your investigation until you find the limits of the contamination. So whether some of that contamination extends under the existing buildings, that's something that we'll find out during the process. As I mentioned before, because the buildings have been there for so long, they're a barrier to anything being released to the soil below the buildings. So typically, you won't find contamination under buildings. So the only scenario under which we would do additional sampling under the buildings is if the investigations of these areas of concern lead us to areas under the building.
Deborah, you mentioned the performance bond is calculated at the time of application. I think you're referring to the stormwater bond, not the environmental.
Yes, but I don't believe the town that's the only performance bond that the town collects. There's no environmental, not to my knowledge, there's no bond.
So I'm not sure who to direct this question to. Is that irrelevant, or is there someone here who can comment on that possibility and the legality?
On the possibility of requiring a bond?
The possibility of the township requiring a performance bond to prevent stalled site.
The only performance bonds that the municipality is permitted to impose are in the municipal land use law. The municipal land use law was amended probably about a year and a half ago to clarify what types of performance and maintenance bonds developers would be able or would be required to post. And that is a determination that is made pursuant to a developer agreement. And that is also a determination made between the township attorney and the township engineer, who is Paul Ferreira, not Casey and Keller. They're the board engineers. So that's a determination that is made after the planning board process.
John, is that the end of your questioning?
Yes, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pooja. I know we have two people. We may have the real Kathy O'Leary on, and I know we've got Terry. But we're coming up to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I think, is it fair to say that there's probably one or two outstanding items that want a continuation at the next meeting on this subject? I particularly think of, the EWMA report just being updated with some missing documents. Is that fair to say? And maybe we could just continue this next meeting, or is there a sentiment to continue?
From my perspective, I think we end at 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Then why don't we go with that? Then if everybody's comfortable with that, and Terry, Kathy, if you can hold your thoughts to the next meeting, and then any other documentation. And again, Deb, if any documentation is received, that'll go onto the website.
Absolutely.
Hopefully in good time. And we have a stenographer, court reporter here as well. What was the thoughts about that?
Thoughts of what? I'm sorry, what thoughts about the court reporter?
In terms of would that information be available, or is that something that will not?
The applicant generally will make the information available to us, yes, for a copy or either in a PDF.
I just don't know that it'll be available before next meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Okay, I know we've got some other agenda. Sorry, Deb.
Mr. Chair, 1 second. Mr. Renowitz questioned on where the two monitoring wells is and what document it is in. I found it's in the Prism site plans demolition plan, and the two monitoring wells are between buildings 2 and 3.
Fabulous, thank you. And that was C3, right?
C3, correct.
Yeah, I was looking for it. Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
I know we have a couple of agenda items, but unless maybe we can hold those off to next time out, updates from the committees. No old business as far as I'm aware of.
Are we, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, are we going to schedule the next meeting now before you close?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, just get the other points out of the way first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I don't think there's anything else we want to continue with on the conversation. So let's the last minute or two with what's our thoughts for next meeting.
June 23rd is the next meeting. So we would need a motion and a second to carry the application to June 23rd.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that's without further notice. So this is the notice that the public is receiving tonight, that the meeting is going to reconvene. The hearing will reconvene on June 23rd. Do we need an extension in the time to act?
We definitely will. I will work with Mr. Regan on that.
We can do that on the record. Does
Great.
the applicant agree to an extension in time for the board to act at least until June 23rd?
Yes.
Thank you. Good one.
And lastly, as lastly,
2020, and I'll be asking the same question more than likely on June 23rd.
Okay.
So why don't we? Instead of my asking every meeting, why don't we extend time until July 31st?
That's fine, Frank.
That's fine.
Is that okay? And can we
Yeah.
follow
Yes.
up in writing tomorrow, Mr. Regan?
Sure.
Thank you.
and note to the public one last time that when we begin the hearing on June 23rd, we will continue questions from the public with regard to the testimony from Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, thank you.
And sorry, Mr. Chair, we're not taking questions in advance, right? They have to ask the questions on the day of?
Correct. If
All right.
any members of the public wish to ask me procedural questions regarding the format of the hearing, they can email them to me. I will I will have them go through our board attorney just to make sure that we are answering correctly. But other than that, yeah, every question must be asked on record at the hearing.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to submit anything for testimony, they need to do that ahead of time and be present to provide the background and offer the testimony as evidence.
Yeah, that's if anyone from the public wishes to have anything entered, any document, any plan, map, anything like that entered as an exhibit, it can only be entered if that member of the public appears and testifies and is examined with regard to what is being provided as an exhibit.
Right.
But let's make a further note and remind everybody that statements and testimony from the public will be at the end of all testimony provided by the applicant.
Correct.
Well, with that, I appreciate, actually, I think this process worked out okay. So thanks everybody for taking the time to present and discuss and holding it in a very cordial fashion. So I think that made the process a lot more successful and better than it could have been. So thanks everybody. With that said, is there a motion to end the meeting?
Make sure that Mr. Ed, you're available on the 23rd, right?
I am, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Brendan. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting
Thank
adjourned.
you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for embracing the technology.
Brandon, you need a haircut.
Brandon,
29th.
I'll give you one. I did a good job on mine, Brandon. I'll come and give you one.
All right, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Cheers all.